Story 1.
My husband caught me cheating, exposed video proofs, and shattered my life in front of family and kids. I thought I'd arrive early at the lawyer's office, but when my lawyer and I got there, Dave and his lawyer were already in the conference room. Seeing him with an attractive woman triggered my usual jealous reaction, making me feel somewhat inferior to him. Deep down, at 48, he was more handsome than at 20, tall and muscular, owning a successful business, and leading the local chamber of commerce. I shuddered at the thought that if today didn't go well, I might never feel his comforting arms again. Dave barely acknowledged me as I followed my lawyer into the room. My face turned pale when the red-haired lawyer reached out to reassure him. I interpreted it as her wanting to quickly finish the meeting to pursue him. I knew from experience that she would enjoy it, as my husband was skilled and knew how to use his charm. Dave smiled at her but remained neutral when he looked at me. Frustrated by Dave's determination not to talk to me, I was forced to attend the meeting. While my lawyer chatted with the red-haired lawyer, I sat down. Dave took a folder from my large purse, opened it, and laid out the finished 2-page script. Seeing Dave smile faintly, I knew he was aware of my thorough preparation. He set up a laptop, plugged in speakers, and put a single sheet of paper next to it. Then, casually, he put his hands on the table and looked at me with a polite but insensitive face. No anger, no hate, no grief. I had prepared for this meeting for 3 days, knowing my script by heart. I used my knowledge of David Brown to appeal to his emotions. We gathered to discuss Mrs. Julianne Brown agreeing to sign a divorce petition if Dave listened to her for at least 1 hour. "If everyone is ready, I suggest the hour begins now," she said, turning the timer knob. It began to tick loudly, emphasizing the silence in the room. I was annoyed that Dave insisted on having lawyers present, instead of a private meeting. I planned to share my feelings for the next 45 minutes before making Dave admit to something justifying my inappropriate behavior. It's awkward with just the two of us, even more humiliating in front of strangers. Well, no point in dwelling on the negatives. I had no choice. Glancing at my unnecessary notes, I crossed my fingers, remembering my friend Sonia's advice. I cleared my throat. I expressed gratitude for Dave's willingness to meet with me today. I acknowledged my error and clarified that it wasn't related to his failure but rather my own self-centeredness. I had spent days reflecting on this, hoping that Dave would appreciate my honesty. I believed he desired to forgive me, and my speech aimed to offer the justification he needed. Contemplating what might happen if the kids were at home, I considered playing the Dave "you can't break up the family" card, confident it would succeed. Observing his reaction to my speech, I examined his face and was taken aback by his response. In the ensuing silence, Dave's expression remained neutral. He didn't even direct his gaze toward me. Methodically, he raised his pen and marked a check next to the first sentence in his notes. My first words almost completely confused me. I said exactly what he expected, shaking my confidence. In my arrogance, I forgot that not only had I come up with my argument based on 30 years of knowing him, but he had spent those 30 years looking back at me. I'm not ashamed to admit I was shocked. I emphasized the importance of sticking to the script, reiterating that the situation with Dave was a result of my own foolish and self-centered decisions. I conveyed the feelings of being lost without children, feeling aged, unattractive, and worthless. I explained that I met Jason while collaborating on a church committee, describing him as sophisticated and a skilled seducer who knew precisely which button to press and when. He began acting like a friend, listening to my problems after church meetings last year when you were frequently away. But one day, after a church meeting, Jason suggested going to a cafe, and unfortunately, I agreed. It all seemed innocent, and he appeared as a good friend, so I didn't realize he was adept at breaking through a woman's defenses. Well, from coffee shops, we progressed to restaurants where he complained about his wife. I know it's a cliché, but by then I trusted him. The restaurants became increasingly upscale, and the gifts he gave me became more enjoyable. "Oh, Dave, you can't imagine how nice it is when a guy 15 years younger than you tries to win you over. But you'd be proud because 4 months ago he asked me to sleep with him, and I declined. I should have refused to meet him after that when his intentions were clear, but by then, I had become somewhat reliant on the effect his compliments and attention had on my ego and confidence. I fell silent and sniffled, wiping my eyes with the finger I had previously rubbed on an onion piece in my pocket. It stung so much that I didn't dare rub my other eye. One teary eye should have been enough. I stopped, started again, faltered, and hesitated. "Oh, honey, I'm so ashamed that I didn't break up with him." He took me to a restaurant and bought a $1,300 bottle of Grange, even though he himself doesn't drink wine. Instead of wasting it, I drank almost all of it. I'm pretty sure that's what he wanted. I was too nervous to resist him. When we left the restaurant, he offered to take me home, and I foolishly agreed. Once in the driveway, he leaned over and kissed me, but I was too drunk to stop him. You know how I get after a couple of glasses of wine. Then he started touching my chest. At this point, my logic was completely broken, and I remember just thinking that I should move him out of the driveway so the neighbors wouldn't see us. For the same reason, I opened the garage door and forced him to park inside. I cheated a little by admitting that even in the car I thought Jason might be staying a while, and I certainly didn't want the neighbors to see a strange car in the driveway the next morning. But it was all a calculated risk on my part. I knew enough about men in general to understand that being betrayed was a major blow to a man's ego, and I wanted Dave to ensure that no one else ever found out about it. Well, except for 2 lawyers. Jason got out of the car as the garage door was closing and started kissing me again. As I said, I had already drunk most of the bottle of Grange and was ripe for plucking. He grabbed my key and led me inside. I took him to one of the spare bedrooms, and I will be ashamed of this until the day I die. I let him do whatever he wanted with me. I'm so sorry, Dave. My only saving grace was that I was composed enough with him to get him to put on a safe. After Jason came, I think we both fell asleep, I because I was drunk, and he because he must have been tired after a 4 or 5 month chase. I know for sure I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't drunk and depressed. When I woke up, and I definitely would have kicked him to the curb immediately, instead, you entered the room and turned on the light. I have never been so ashamed in my life. The look of pain on your face just killed me. I realized how much misuse I caused to you and us with one simple mistake. With tears still flowing from one eye, I turned my pleading gaze to my husband. Having spent a lifetime together, I knew that I could read his expression like an open book and be able to judge how my request was going. Not true. His expression remained neutral. In fact, he didn't even look at me. Strange, but he was fiddling with the laptop in front of him. I thought he was writing notes until he clicked the link on his screen. A voice came from the speakers, my voice. Gee, don't kiss me, Eureka Beer. What about you? Rotten grape breath? What? I had one lousy glass of white. The audio clip stopped, and the room fell into a thunderous silence. I think that's how it was. The roaring sound in my head drowned out everything else. Yes, I felt embarrassed and humiliated when Dave walked in on me that night with Jason before lifting Jason by his hair and beating the crap out of his body. But that was insignificant compared to the fact that I had just been caught in a huge lie. This completely threw me off track. I was so confident that my script would work. My eyes darted around the room. Dave's lawyer smiled slightly. Mine looked slightly embarrassed. Dave just looked at me expectantly with that damn blank expression. Later, I will never understand why I didn't immediately realize what it all meant. What the heck? Dave had an audio recording of my meeting with Jason that night. Being wound up, it never occurred to me to follow the logic of this. Why does he need a voice recorder there if he didn't know in advance that he could record something? What else did we say? The silence stretched, uncomfortably for a long time, and I looked at the cryptic shard of my notes and, looking back, stupidly plunged into the script I'd prepared. I clung to him like a drowning man clings to debris. It was only once. It won't happen again, nothing like that. Please believe me. I just wasn't strong enough to resist him. But I wasn't so out of control that I wouldn't force him to use protection or let him take me on our bed. He wanted it, but I would never do that, no matter how drunk I was. We were in Megan's old room, right? Dave just looked at me sadly, and I didn't know what was worse, his sad face or his impassive one. He shook his head and turned to the computer. I felt, rather than heard, him double-click the icon, and I cringed. I just like to watch how you lie in front of me, full of desire. It is very hot, Jason's voice said. Then, once it was finished, another double-click, and Jason's voice came again. When can we have time in bed again, in your clueless husband's bed? It was so cool. This time, Dave clicked and ended the clip, then just looked at me silently, accusatory. What could I even say? Everything I had claimed was debunked, not by Dave, but by my own words. Protection? A one-time drunken mistake? Not getting close with my husband in our own bed? The whole thing crumbled as a lie in just 30 words. I stood, speechless. Though it was awkward, I looked at Dave for any clue. His neutral gaze revealed nothing. I noticed my lawyer checking her watch, making me focus on the ticking timer and realizing the 60 minutes I had to salvage my marriage were slipping away, and I admit, going terribly. I forced myself to suppress panic. Apologies for the lie, Dave, about it being the first time. I just didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. I thought if I could convince you it was a one-time thing, and for the exact reason I stated, you wouldn't be so offended. I stumbled back into silence. Should I now admit I had dated Jason several times a week for over 6 months? The trouble was, I didn't know what Dave knew. He had recorded conversations revealing the night he found us wasn't the first or only night, but what else did he know? Hiding the recorder where I usually met Jason hinted at suspicion of at least one more time. I just didn't know. However, I knew that if I was caught telling one more lie, it would all be over. Well, Juliana, it's time to be vague. Avoid details and stick to the facts. The truth is, Jason did seduce me, and it took a while. He has a thing for older women. It's true that being pursued by a man almost my kid's age gave me an ego boost. I admit it, I was weak. I thought about saying I used the master bed only once, the first time. It would be a lie, but would put me in a better light. But not knowing how long Dave knew about my extramarital activities held me back. I decided to stay silent on this. However, I couldn't remain silent on everything. Realizing I had limited time to rectify the situation, unsure of the best course of action, I turned my attention to my notes. I discarded the initial points after being exposed and focused on words highlighted in capital letters. I conveyed that I never ceased to love and respect Dave, emphasizing that I gave him no less love than I always had. I explained that Jason was an additional dimension that didn't diminish anything from my love for Dave, but rather added an overflowing quality, if I could describe it that way. When I fell silent, Dave redirected his gaze to his laptop screen, furrowed his brow, and appeared momentarily confused. However, he eventually relaxed again, listening to the recording, a continuation of the earlier soundtrack. I understood that Dave's frown indicated he was searching for an icon on the screen before realizing it was one of the open files. It would be better if he didn't grasp it, and he evidently started over, going back to the beginning of the video. I revisited Jason's question about being close in our marital bed like the first time. I cringed, knowing my words once again condemned me. I already told you, never again, not after the last time. That night, Dave stepped out of the shower and inadvertently stepped on a large drop of white, for which I was grateful. Dave accepted my explanation about sneezing, attributing the drop to snot. Sinking lower into my seat, I anticipated the predictable words that would follow. Although I initially felt smug when I uttered them, that feeling dissipated. Distracting Dave by offering to clean his leg and doing it nicely diverted his attention, commenting, "You have to admit, doll, that your husband sometimes acts like an ignorant idiot." I found myself discussing how Jason and I had successfully evaded detection, such as when he had to hide in the closet when Dave came home early. Insulting? Yes. Dave is clueless. Initially, I found it sweet that he trusted me so much. Now, he's just an ignorant fool. Sometimes I wonder if we could have time in bed right here while he's in the room. The mocking tone made me realize I was rehashing an actual point. With these words and such a tone, I couldn't even convince myself I loved and respected my husband, let alone him. Again, confusion set in. Before this meeting, I convinced myself I loved and respected Dave. But after what I did and said, how is that possible? Steeped in the ticking, tense silence after the final nail in my coffin, Dave turned to look at me. I couldn't look him in the face, so I turned to his lawyer. The contempt on her face made me shut down. Any doubts that Dave was just another client to her vanished. I looked away from her and now looked at my lawyer. She too wasn't quick enough to hide her disdain. Here I am, fighting for my future, surrounded by people who think I'm something they stepped into at the dog park, and one of them should be on my side. My confidence dissipated like dew in the midday sun, and my self-esteem quickly followed suit. Perhaps that's why I revisited my notes and chose to adopt an offensive stance. I conveyed to Dave that over the last 6 months he had been paying me decreasing attention, taking me for granted, traveling for business more frequently, and seemingly distancing himself from me. All of this occurred simultaneously with the children leaving home, leaving me feeling lost. I expressed how he was never there when I needed him, failing to reassure me about my age and attractiveness or provide comfort in times of need. Pausing, I noticed Dave's eyes returning to his screen, and I cringed as his fingers danced, opening the selected file. It became apparent that Jason's words were from just after our second encounter, that fateful night, shortly before Dave reached a breaking point. Jason spoke about our recent lack of a bed life, expressing his desire for more frequent encounters. He mentioned a canceled trip and how I had requested him to limit Dave's diet. Jason explained that he only had the opportunity that night due to an urgent meeting Dave had to attend. He also expressed a wish for Dave to leave town more often. "Well, I want more," retorted an irritated Jason, to which the clip was once again interrupted. Ashamed, I lowered my eyes to the table, avoiding 3 judgmental glances, and recalled my emotional state during the last conversation. The truth was that the novelty of having a lover, even one as young and energetic as Jason, was beginning to wear off. Jason and my actions in betraying my husband had caused me to lose respect for Dave, and it was at least beginning to prick my conscience. Loss of respect, more than anything else, I think, was the reason for my emotional distance from my husband. Even as I prepared for this meeting, fully intending to blame him for pulling away from me, I realized that it was a lie. To allow myself to continue to betray him, I emotionally divorced Dave. Cutting him off in bed was an easy decision, simply because Dave's lovemaking was so different from Jason's impatience that it was impossible to confuse the two. This reinforced to me that what I was doing was very, very wrong. So I began to reject my husband's advances. Well, he pressed for a while, then he stopped. I suddenly realized that it should have been screaming for my attention months ago. Dave suddenly gave up his bed life around the same time he began working longer hours and going away more often. At the time, I thought he was also emotionally distancing himself from me. I closed my eyes, now completely confused about who was distancing himself from who, and then something clicked. Dave must have known for a long time. That's why he knew he had to hide the recorder in Megan's room. Crap. My entire approach to this meeting was to minimize my crime, heal Dave's wounded pride, eat some humble pie, all to get my life back and the future I so desperately wanted. I thought I was calming a recently wounded bull, but if I was right about him knowing at least 2 weeks before he discovered, nay, confronted, me, then he was a lot more cunning than I thought. And I was wasting my time appealing to his emotions. In short, I had no idea what to do. I'm much better when I plan than when I'm spontaneous, hence 2 pages of notes. But I had to do something. Time was running out. The ticking of the clock confirmed this. In desperation, I took my notes and began to look for hope. The pounding in my head made absorbing the words a very slow process. Nothing jumped out. Then I realized that the recordings were a red herring because the game had changed so much. If Dave knew I was leaving for a while, what was his state of mind? He, of course, was offended by my betrayal, but most of all, he was worried about my motivation. Wasn't I satisfied with the quantity and quality of his lovemaking? Did I find him boring and want to explore my kinky side? Did I love Jason? Was I really going to run away with him? I could correct these fears and doubts. I risked looking into those expressionless eyes, wondering if I should risk lying again. If only I could remember what else Jason and I talked about that fateful night. If only I could be sure that this was the only night Dave had recorded. Of course, the sequence had to be suspect. Install recorders, resist. He could not have been sure of this for long, he just wasn't a good actor. I desperately wanted to convince him of the truth. I still loved and respected him. My desperate desire that he would not abandon me proved this. It was far beyond my fear of losing my very comfortable lifestyle. But how do I convince him that I respect him after we've all heard me call him a goofy in front of my lover? What's the point of trying to justify denigrating him to my lover as a sop to my conscience and creating a common bond between Jason and me? Nothing, that I could see. The same applied to love for him. If I had caught him deceiving me, wild horses would not have been able to draw the conclusion out of me that he still loved me. So, convincing him that I loved and respected him would take time. I had won time by convincing him not to insist that I immediately sign the divorce papers. But how long does that damn timer keep ticking to convince him of this? One thing was for sure, my next few sentences were going to score points. Lots of points. Summoning my courage, I directed my gaze across the table at Dave. I conveyed to him that I understood he perceived a loss of my love and respect, reassuring him that it was not the case. I affirmed my love for him and our life together, expressing a sincere desire to spend the remainder of my days solely with him. I acknowledged the gravity of my actions, admitting that Jason was a distraction and that I didn't love him. Furthermore, I assured Dave that running away with Jason was never my intention. I admitted the wrongdoing of my actions, particularly in response to Jason's proposal to limit our closeness. Reflecting on the situation, I confessed that I didn't know why I went through with it, especially after convincing myself that I was merely providing Jason with an excess that Dave couldn't handle. I highlighted that Jason lacked the stamina and experience that Dave possessed, and my actions were driven solely by lust and selfishness. Although the physical aspect brought a temporary satisfaction, it was devoid of any genuine emotion. I clarified that I didn't engage in the same perversions with Jason that I had denied Dave throughout the years. Time seemed to slow down, mirroring the pace of those on the verge of passing away. The disintegration of my marriage unfolded in slow motion, with everyone around me moving at a normal speed. To my left, my lawyer expressed her disdain, tossing her pen on the table and turning to me. It was evident that, in this moment, I couldn't even pay someone to be on my side. Dave's lawyer leaned to the side to gain a better view of the laptop screen, revealing that Dave was not playing sound files as I had assumed, but rather video clips. This realization intensified the gravity of the situation. Dave's lawyer grabbed his hand in a show of support, and though he wasn't looking at me, his reaction conveyed a profound hurt, as if the man meant to support him had betrayed him. I witnessed a fleeting expression of devastation on his face, and a single tear rolled down from the eye closest to me. I questioned whether he was truly suffering or if he had steeled himself by fixating on the screen. Amidst the chaos, a few irrelevant facts registered in my mind. The recording was made at least 3 weeks before the collision, meaning Dave had been witnessing my betrayal for some time, enough to discern a pattern. Silence enveloped us as the speakers played, the heat that had once suffused the room now transforming into a sense of dirtiness, sloppiness, and tastelessness. I focused on the table, and my lawyer laid out the divorce papers before me. Helpless, I couldn't counter the vile behavior that Dave had uncovered. With unparalleled ease, he dismantled all my rationalizations, minimizations, and feeble attempts at reconciliation. It was over. Dave, acting as an orchestra conductor, didn't utter a word today. Instead, he indicated the section of the orchestra he wanted to play next, using his skills and talents to execute a silent symphony of separation. No, it wasn't Dave. I ascended the scaffold myself, blindfolded, and with a noose in hand, kicking the lever. Dave simply erected the scaffold and departed as soon as he played the last clip. He knew precisely what I was going to say, leaving me with no chance at redemption. And when I came up with my arguments, based on my close knowledge of him after observing him for 3 decades, I had forgotten that he also looked at me for the same amount of time. Looking back at me with his smart, penetrating eyes, the shame and humiliation were unbearable and finally caused me to run away. Escape was what I needed. Running back. To the house that was still my home, at least until Dave got the eviction notice that was part of the agreement, and escaping to the children, who I hope will never know and will continue to love me unconditionally. The only way to salvation lay through a receipt. With the loss of most of my life, I took the pen, signed the 2 agreements, and threw it away in one fluid motion. I was surprised Dave's business wasn't worth more, but that's what my lawyer's assessment found. And of course, Dave had plenty of time to hide most of it. By that time, the last recording had thankfully ended, and the ticking silence returned. My lawyer took the signed papers, handing me a copy while placing the rest in her briefcase. She left the room, leaving me seated, frozen, torn between the desire to run and the wish to convey a positive message. I longed for an ember of hope, something to convince myself that there might be a chance to rekindle the flame someday, to let Dave know that I still cared about his well-being. The sharp sound of an alarm clock disrupted my thoughts, prompting me to stand up and deliver my positive phrase. The jackal, holding Dave's hand with both hands, urged him not to seek revenge on Jason, expressing her fear of never forgiving herself if he ended up in prison. Dave's response was another damning video, thankfully not featuring my voice but that of another woman, speaking in an almost shrill tone. She mentioned the consequences Jason would face if her brothers got to him first, identifying herself as Mrs. Jason. Initially, I had thought Jason's silence after the beating reflected fear on his part, but now I pondered that being divorced and penniless might be a fitting end for the scammer. The burden on my conscience grew heavier as I considered that he might die because he had been involved with me. As I prepared to leave, I couldn't bring myself to look Dave in the face. Whether he had his expressionless face, or whether he was laughing or crying, it all pained me. A constant reminder of the misuse I had caused this good man. He had lost everything except my house and money, and suffered a tremendous emotional blow, all at my hands. I deserved every bit of his anger. Through tears, I managed to squeeze out a feeble, "Goodbye, dear," as I shuffled toward the door. My pathetic attempt to salvage my old life was discarded, akin to a plague beetle. Perhaps my daughter Megan would visit me while I drowned myself in oblivion. Or, if she wasn't available, then my son Joel. Just as I began to push the door, voices behind me caught my attention. Another damn recording. An excited young male voice accused, "Cheater!" A very familiar female voice intervened, asking, "Are you sure, Dad?" "I think I'll drink alone today," was Dave's quiet reply.
Story 2.
My surprise and my wife's bag almost cost her a fair partner when I caught them in the act. Linda, my wife for a whole decade, was there to greet me as I walked through the door after work on Wednesday night. She wanted me to take a seat at the table because she said we had some serious talking to do. I thought to myself, oh boy, this sounds like the beginning of many difficult conversations. As I took a seat, she began by saying she was sure that I knew she loved me and would never do anything to harm our marriage. Her words left me feeling uneasy. I replied, "Okay," but before I could continue, she interrupted, taking a deep breath. I could tell this conversation was about to take a troubling turn. She continued, "I love you, and I want us to grow old together, but I've made a decision. I want to have an affair." I was completely blindsided by this revelation and didn't like it one bit. I tried to clarify, "So let me get this straight. You love me, you don't want to harm our relationship, but you want to have closeness with someone else?" I asked somewhat crudely, to which she responded, "I wouldn't put it quite like that. I've met someone I'm interested in having a physical relationship with. It would be occasional, and I promise to always be honest with you about it. I believe I love you enough for this not to affect how I feel about you. If you truly love me as you say, you should let me do this because I feel the need to." She wore a confident smile as she explained. Confused and taken aback, I replied, "I don't understand why you think you need to do this, and I can't fathom how it wouldn't impact us. Have you and this person already made plans?" Linda nodded. "We're tentatively planning to go away for a weekend next week." She asked me a question and requested honesty. She wanted to know how I'd react if she proposed the same thing to me. I knew that a truthful answer might make her explode because the idea itself was quite surprising. I replied, stating that I would be okay with it as long as she assured me it wouldn't affect our relationship. She said, "You know damn well you would have flipped out if I ever brought up such a thing." I scoffed at her comment and she seemed surprised, responding, "I honestly didn't expect you to react this way. I thought your love for me would allow me to do something this important." I retorted, "Well, whatever you've been smoking must be illegal. Did you really think I'd just give you the green light to be with this guy? So I'm supposed to sit at home, twiddling my thumbs while you have a weekend rendezvous? Maybe I didn't think things through too well," she admitted. "You're right, I didn't consider a lot of things, including my own feelings. If I say no to this, will you still go ahead with it? I honestly don't know. I never thought you'd refuse me. We both didn't think this through very well. Here's what we'll do. Give me a few days to think this over. Let's sit down Sunday afternoon and discuss this after I've had some time to reflect." Tonight took me by surprise. Feeling uneasy, I went to our bedroom and began relocating my belongings to the guest room. She inquired, asking me what I was doing. I explained that I preferred not to share a bed with her because it seemed like she was more focused on someone else than me. After entering the guest room, I closed the door with force. The night wasn't particularly restful, but I did devise a plan. It dawned on me that if she followed through with her intentions, our relationship would be irreparably damaged. The following day, I left for work as usual but didn't exchange a word with Linda. I called my workplace and explained that I needed the next 2 days for personal reasons. Then I went to work on my strategy. I purchased 3 voice-activated recorders, placing one near the phone, one in our bedroom, and one in her car. I even found a phone tap recorder to connect to our landlines. My next stop was the cell phone provider. Since my name was on her phone plan, I easily obtained a copy of her phone charges. Later, while she was still at work, I decided to snoop into her email accounts. I discovered one that I hadn't known about, but the password was a piece of cake. What I found there was quite revealing, although at least I learned she hadn't been physically involved with him yet. I set up the account to forward any emails to me without leaving any traces. To cap off my day, I got my hands on a pair of discreet GPS locators. These little gadgets were easy to hide. I planned to slip one into her wallet because she'd likely carry her cash and credit cards with her, and the other would find its place in her car. It had been a hectic day, but I'd set up everything to keep tabs on her. The only missing piece was getting access to her cell phone to check for messages. I hoped to do that later in the evening, along with planting the GPS devices. Upon checking her emails, I discovered that she had exchanged quite a few messages with a coworker named Frank Jones. Frank was the guy in the middle of all this, and I was ready to turn his world upside down just as he had done to mine. The emails confirmed that the upcoming weekend was a green light, regardless of what I had to say about it. That Friday, I made my way to a highly recommended divorce lawyer. I instructed him to start the divorce process with adultery as the cause, listing Frank Jones as the man I intended to sue. The lawyer assured me that it would be straightforward with proper evidence. I presented him with all the emails, phone records, and mentioned that I'd soon have audio tapes as well. He seemed pleased and committed to starting the proceedings immediately. When Linda returned home that evening, I gave her the cold shoulder and didn't utter a word as she prepared dinner. I left the house and headed to a bar to grab a meal and have a few beers. Upon my return, she tried to talk to me, but I simply walked past her, entered the guest room, and slammed the door shut. The only chance she had to salvage our marriage was by canceling her plans with Frank. But I wasn't optimistic about that happening. I continued to ignore her throughout the weekend until Sunday afternoon, when I decided it was time for a conversation. We both took seats in the kitchen and I began by expressing my lack of enthusiasm about her request. I explained that I thought it over extensively and couldn't find any way to be comfortable with it. I pointed out that despite her claims that it wouldn't affect our marriage, it was evident that it was already causing harm. I noted her upset demeanor and suggested that if she had considered things from my perspective, she might have been more understanding. I mentioned my attempts to see it from her point of view, but I couldn't see any positive outcomes. Therefore, I had to decline her request. "How can you be so selfish if you love me?" she asked. "If anyone's selfish here, it seems to be you wanting to be with someone else," I replied. "What if I go through with it anyway?" she challenged. "There will be serious consequences for any extramarital affair. We both made vows 10 years ago to be faithful." "I know, but this is something I have to do." Well, I guess this discussion is over. You really need to think about this. I got up and left the house, taking my laptop to a Wi-Fi spot to keep an eye on their emails. She was furious and assured him that she was going no matter what. He told her that was great because he had already booked room 125 at the Hilton in Kansas City for Friday and Saturday nights. I immediately reserved that room for Thursday night. They were making this way too easy. They were also planning a romantic date on Saturday evening with dinner, dancing, and, well, closeness. Linda mentioned that she bought some new underwear just for their date. I grabbed a bite to eat while keeping an eye on their correspondence. They had moved past my refusal and were deep into making plans for their weekend. Check-in time was at 3. So he was going to pick her up at 1 since it was a 2-hour drive and they wanted to be there as early as possible. I was surprised he was going to pick her up at the house. I needed to figure out what I wanted to do about that. I also reserved a room for the weekend close enough to theirs to intercept all their signals. Over the next few days, I gathered all the necessary equipment, including a couple of small fiber optic HD video cameras. I planned to install them in the room on Thursday to be fully prepared to document their weekend escapades. This evidence would be perfect for my divorce case. I continued to ignore her the entire time, but Wednesday marked the day of reckoning for her. I decided to offer her one last chance. If she chose Frank, that would be the end for us. I asked her to join me at the table for a moment. She didn't seem thrilled but complied. I initiated the conversation by asking if she had given it more thought. She confirmed that she had and expressed her intention to proceed with her plan. She mentioned her upcoming trip with Frank and expressed hope that we could move past this. I let out a sigh and cautioned her, telling her that this was her last chance to reconsider. I advised against jeopardizing our marriage for someone else and warned her of potential consequences if she went through with it. Despite my warning, she remained firm in her decision. I concluded by stating that she had chosen Frank over me, indicating the finality of her choice. I then left the room, closing the door forcefully as I usually did. It was clear that our marriage was over and someone would have to face the consequences. Thursday morning, I went to work and requested the afternoon and the following day off to finalize my divorce plans with Linda. My boss was sympathetic and offered his support, allowing me the time I needed. I drove to Kansas City on Thursday, checked into their room, and set up all the surveillance devices, ensuring they were functioning properly. I wanted to gather all the evidence necessary for the divorce proceedings, and then I'd deal with them. Using my laptop, I verified that all the cameras were working and aimed correctly. I waited for them to turn off and then moved around to confirm they would activate. Everything seemed perfect. I walked down the hall past their room to ensure I had the necessary range for monitoring. Once again, it was within range. Upon returning home, I contemplated the end of my marriage. I had one more errand to run. I stopped at a gun store and bought a small can of pepper spray to disrupt their romantic date. When I got home, Linda was waiting in the kitchen, looking expectantly at me. I walked past her without a word and slammed my door once more. Linda came into my room trying to be friendly, but I told her to save it for Frank because I didn't need any pity. I turned my back on her, and she left. I slept restlessly that night, but everything was ready to bring this to an end. On Friday morning, I got up, left at the usual time, and didn't utter a word to her. I went to the lawyer's office and signed the divorce papers. I informed them that I would have all the necessary evidence by Monday and requested that she be served with the papers at her workplace on Monday afternoon. I also asked them to serve papers to Frank at the same time as I intended to sue him for alienation of affection. Checking Linda's GPS, it seemed she was at the hair salon. I entered the house and opened her suitcase, where I found her new underwear. They were undeniably alluring, though it was a shame she wasn't doing this for me. Wearing rubber gloves, I took out her new lingerie and sprayed the crotch of her panties and the cups of her bra with pepper spray before placing them back in the suitcase. This was going to be interesting. I went to our bank and closed all our joint accounts, transferring all the cash to a new account. I also canceled all the credit cards that bore both our names. With a satisfying morning's work behind me, I headed home to bid farewell to my wife. Around 12:30, I knew she would be preparing for her new man. As I entered the house, Linda was nowhere in sight, so I assumed she was upstairs getting ready. I went up to her room and walked in, finding her in some underwear I had gifted her in the past. She tried to cover herself, but I told her not to be silly since I had seen it all before. She looked stunning with her new hairstyle, flawless makeup, and enticing lingerie. I couldn't resist sharing my thoughts with her, mentioning that she looked amazing that day. I expressed my disappointment that she didn't put in such effort for me, to which she responded by explaining that she just wanted to feel good about herself that day. Continuing, I told her that she looked alluring, but I felt she was more concerned about what someone else thought than she had ever been about me. In response, she apologized, saying that she simply wanted to feel attractive. I let out a sigh and reminded her that she had always been attractive to me. I emphasized the depth of my love for her and believed that she had loved me as well. I then approached her and gently removed her rings from her left hand. I went on to explain that the ring I had given her on our wedding day held significant meaning for me, symbolizing our vows to forsake all others. I expressed my disappointment that it seemed to hold less meaning for her. I mentioned that I didn't want to see the ring I had given her on her finger while she was with another guy. I also noted that the engagement ring was my mother's, and I intended to keep it for sentimental reasons. I slipped both rings into my pocket and she looked surprised but didn't argue. I won't be here when he arrives, but I don't want him coming into my house. You can't be with him here. If you do, I'll take serious action against him and make sure you won't be desirable to any man again. I promise you that he cannot set foot in my house, do you get it? Yes, I won't let him in. That's good. I'll be keeping an eye on things. She asked, why are you acting like this? I replied, because the love of my life just shattered that love. I hope this weekend is worth the consequences. Goodbye, Linda. I turned and walked away from my soon-to-be ex-wife. She yelled at me as I left, but I was done with her. I parked down the street, ensuring Linda could see me. If he entered the house, I'd risk jail, but they'd suffer more. Soon his car pulled up. He walked to the door and rang the bell. Linda opened the door and came out with her suitcase. She set it down and embraced him, followed by a long, passionate kiss. As he picked up her suitcase, she glanced my way, wearing a smug grin. She sat right beside him in the car and shot me another smug look as they drove past me. I responded by flipping her off, wiping that smug look off her face. Upon returning home, I changed all the locks and the garage door code. I had already packed my suitcase, so I grabbed it and headed to KC. After checking in, I went to my room and set up my laptop. The camera aimed at the foot of the bed showed Linda making a move, indicating they'd already been intimate. It was quite evident that he hadn't lasted very long. When he emerged from the bathroom, he was completely without clothes. I couldn't help but laugh, seeing that he had a very small tool. Linda was used to much more than what this guy could deliver. About that time, Frank joined Linda on the bed, clearly ready for another round. She smiled at him and opened her arms. I couldn't help but laugh again when she reached for his tiny tool. He didn't have to hold back because I'd be surprised if she could even feel that tiny thing inside her. Wow, did she make a terrible choice. This guy was absolutely pitiful. I could detect a hint of frustration on her face as he took a break. It seemed like she wasn't going to be too pleased with the outcome of this weekend. She'd return home frustrated and then get kicked out the next day. He was soon ready for another round, and he provided her with yet another underwhelming 4-minute session. He had finished 3 times already, and she wasn't even close. This was turning out better than I'd ever hoped. I had to stop watching and went out for dinner and a couple of drinks. I left everything recording to gather all the evidence I might need for the lawyer, and to make it abundantly clear to her what a poor choice she had made. When I returned, he was fast asleep, and she appeared even more frustrated. This was actually quite enjoyable once I got over the pain of losing my wife. I went to bed thinking about how much fun I was going to have messing with him tomorrow. I considered some of the attractive women I'd seen at the bar and knew I'd soon be free to pursue them. I drifted off to sleep with a contented smile on my face. There was no more anguish for me. My path was set and I knew where I was headed. I woke up feeling refreshed and ready for some fun. After a shower, I went out for a nice breakfast and picked up some snacks just in case I couldn't get away later. Returning to my room, I called a local florist. I ordered a bouquet for Linda, just like the ones I used to give her on our anniversary. Since there wouldn't be another anniversary, I wanted her to reflect on what she was jeopardizing. I requested it to be delivered at 11 a.m. My timing might have been good, but it didn't really matter. The timing turned out to be perfect. They left the room for a while and, upon returning, resumed their romantic activities. They were soon without clothes, and he had just begun when there was a knock at the door. The florist delivered the flowers, and I could see a contemplative expression on Linda's face before it quickly turned to anger. She grabbed her cell phone and dialed a number. My cell phone started ringing, and I answered it, leading to a brief conversation. "Hello, how are you?" "Not great. My wife is out with some other guy while I'm here, getting angrier by the minute." "Why do you even care?" "Well, I received a bouquet of flowers just like the ones you always get me for our anniversary. I was curious about what you were up to." "I don't know how you could think I did that. Firstly, you and your genius boyfriend kept me in the dark about where you were going. Secondly, if I had sent you flowers, they would have been ragweed, and the card would have read, 'To my cheating wife.' Not very nice, right? But then again, neither is your little escapade with Frankie. Maybe those flowers will give you some idea of what you're throwing away." I noticed a shocked look on her face as I turned off my phone. She immediately tried calling again, but naturally, I didn't answer. She attempted a few more times, but eventually gave up. She told Frankie about what I had said, and he reassured her that I would eventually get over it. However, that wasn't going to happen until I was rid of her. She wasn't initially in the mood for closeness, but after a while, she began to give in. So I decided to order a pizza delivery and got Linda's favorite pizza. The pizza arrived just as Frankie was getting back into the action. He was pretty upset and didn't want to pay, but the delivery guy confirmed the room number and his cell phone number. He even threatened to call the police, so Frankie reluctantly paid up. Since they had paid for it, they decided to eat their lunch. After enjoying their meal, they chatted for a while, but Frankie's hormones got the better of him, and he was after her again. Just as things were heating up, I called a sandwich shop and ordered her favorite sandwich for delivery. About a minute into their intimate time, the sandwich arrived. When Linda saw the sandwich, she concluded that I must have figured out their location. Frankie couldn't believe it, but she spilled the beans about my sarcastic remark, claiming I probably hacked into her new email where he had mentioned it. It took her a while, but she eventually put two and two together. She said I was pretty clever and wouldn't have had much trouble doing that. They decided to get dressed and go out for a while with the plan to return, freshen up, and get ready for their romantic date later. She assured him she'd make it up to him tonight. As they left, I couldn't stop laughing. Tears were rolling down my face. When they got back, they showered, got dressed, and Linda put on some lingerie, giving him a little show. He tried to make a move, but she insisted on going out for their date. I wondered how long it would take for my little surprise to kick in. She finished getting dressed, looking great. I hoped my plan would work, because it was going to be quite the spectacle if it did. Off they went, and I settled in, eagerly awaiting their return. About an hour later, they were back, and Linda dashed into the bathroom and hopped into the shower. She stayed in there for quite a while, and when she emerged, her breasts and crotch were bright red. They looked painful, and it appeared that little Frankie wasn't getting any action tonight either. Linda was lying on the bed, groaning. When Frankie tried to get frisky, she went off on him, explaining that she was in pain and not interested right now. She chalked it up to some sort of allergic reaction to her new lingerie. Little did she know. I spent some time organizing all my videos and making DVDs for my lawyer and Frankie's wife. Once everything was ready, I called it a night. It had been a highly successful day, and I couldn't help but smile. Trouble was brewing in paradise, and I was the cause of it. Sunday morning, I got up and headed back home. Linda was in for a world of trouble when she returned, but tomorrow, it would all be over. When Frankie dropped her off later that day, he didn't even bother walking her to the door, he just let her out. I was sitting on the couch, engrossed in a football game, and didn't even acknowledge her arrival. She announced that she was home, and I barely reacted. She walked right in front of the TV, flashing me a sultry smile, and mentioned that she thought I might be happy to see her considering she was not deceased. I responded by questioning, "What gave you that impression? Do you believe I've suddenly become foolish?" She replied, explaining that she didn't think I was foolish but rather believed that my love for her was strong enough to move past the situation. I retorted, "I did love you wholeheartedly, but that changed after you left with someone else despite my pleas. I poured my emotions out to you, only for it to mean nothing. I stopped caring whether you would return or not once you left with him." She appeared shocked by my feelings and commented that she couldn't believe I felt that way about her. I replied firmly, "Yes, it is indeed the case. You've made a significant mistake." She then inquired if there was any chance for us moving forward, promising to do anything to make things right. I responded with a sarcastic remark, "You could drop down on your knees and apologize." She protested, stating, "I can't do that." I sighed and acknowledged, "I knew you wouldn't," which only reinforces my doubts about the worth of your promises to save our marriage, much like your promise of fidelity when we got married. She said she had been thinking about me all day and wanted to make love that night. I replied coldly, "You need me?" "I don't think so. Making love tonight, not likely. Did you have little Frankie use protection every time you were with him?" She said no, explaining, "He's married and I can't have children." I continued, "Do you think you're the only one he's been raw with? You're damaged goods now as far as I'm concerned. I won't touch you until you get a clean bill of health from a doctor, plus I don't do seconds." "I know he's clean, but you can use protection if you don't trust it," she snapped back. "Right, I'm going to use a rubber to sleep with my wife after she spent the weekend with some loser barebacking guy." "Screw you. You chose little Frankie over me. I'm going out for a while. I can't stand looking at your cheating ass tonight. You can sleep in the guest room." "I prefer the master bedroom. Unlike you, I didn't do anything wrong," she replied firmly. "We can talk about this tomorrow when you get back from work." I'm not sure what else there is to discuss. I left the house and headed to a nearby bar and grill to grab some dinner and clear my head. Well, my head was already clear as I knew exactly what I was doing. I just needed some distance from her. I'm not much of a drinker, so I opted for a meal and took a long walk. When I returned home, she was in my bed. I gave her a stern look and told her to get out. She argued, saying, "This is our bed. I have just as much right to be here as you do." I retorted, "The hell you do. You gave up that right when you got involved with little Frankie. So either get out of my bed or I'll haul your stuff out of here and toss you onto the street." She started crying and slowly left the room, and I made sure to close and lock the door behind her. Her tears were still audible as she walked down the hallway. The next morning, I completely ignored her. We each had breakfast, and she left at her usual time. As she turned to leave, she told me that she loved me. I gave her a cold, scornful look and replied that I had loved her too, making it clear that it was in the past tense. I could see tears welling up as she turned and walked away. Once she was gone, I began packing her belongings into garbage bags. Then I reached out to Frankie's wife. I asked her if she knew that her husband had spent the weekend with my wife. She believed he had been away on a business trip, so when I offered to provide her with copies of my evidence, she was very eager about the idea. I was taken aback when she opened the door. She was absolutely stunning. I stammered and had to apologize to her, blaming my initial shock on her beauty, which was entirely truthful. We got down to business, and I explained what had transpired over the weekend. Linda was furious, and we decided that she would accompany me to the lawyer's office to see if he would take her case. The lawyer agreed to represent her and even offered us a discount. Linda began filling out the necessary paperwork while I spoke with the attorney. I asked him if I needed to wait to serve Frankie too. Protect Linda, and he assured me that as long as she signed the papers beforehand, she would be okay. Linda and I went out for lunch while they got her divorce papers ready. After she signed them, I dropped her off at home and headed back, waiting for Linda to call me. I was supposed to call her that night to update her on how things went. My phone rang around 3 and she sounded pretty upset. She said, "What the hell is this? I just got served with divorce papers, and Frank received some papers about being sued for something." I replied, "Well, it all seems pretty straightforward to me. I warned you that there would be consequences for your weekend. Seems like you didn't take me seriously." "I didn't think you'd actually go through with this," she retorted. I shot back, "Maybe you should have listened to me instead of falling for all the nonsense little Frankie was feeding you. Let's not discuss this over the phone. We can talk when you get back to my place." Then I hung up. I took her stuff in garbage bags and tossed them into the front yard, knowing I was recording this confrontation. It would be useful for getting a restraining order against her if needed. When she pulled into the driveway and saw her belongings strewn about, she flew into a fit of rage. She was screaming incoherently, and spit was flying from her mouth as she unleashed her anger. I remained calm as she vented and eventually broke in to begin our final conversation. "If you want to talk, you need to settle down so we can have a civilized conversation. If not, I'll pack your things in your car and you can leave." She sobbed. "I never thought you would do this to me." I responded firmly, "Do this to you, you foolish woman, you did this to us. I told you numerous times not to do it, and even pleaded with you not to destroy our marriage, but you chose to do just that. So, why would you think I wouldn't file for divorce?" "You said you loved me," she whimpered. "I did love you more than anything, but you shattered my heart in return. The problem is that you didn't love or respect me. I can't live with someone who has such a low opinion of me, even though I still have feelings for you." She asked, "Why do you keep calling him Little Frankie? I had video cameras set up in your room and recorded everything that happened over the weekend. You can see why I call him Little. The first time I saw his underwhelming package, it was so laughable that I couldn't help but cry from laughter. I even wondered if you could actually feel anything with that. I also noticed that you weren't enjoying yourself as much as you do when we have closeness." She replied, "We truly made love, and I'll probably miss that." I offered a different perspective. "Look at it this way, now you have the freedom to be with anyone you want. You can have a new partner every night." She shook her head and said, "I don't want that. I want you, only you." I suggested, "Let's go inside and have a seat for a few minutes. I'm sorry for my harsh words. I'm just dealing with a lot of anger right now, but please understand I would never physically harm anyone. The same can't be said for little Frankie." We went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, just like we had so many times before. It hit me hard when I realized that this would be the last time we sat together like this. She asked, "You wouldn't actually hurt Frank, would you?" I responded firmly, "Why not? He destroyed our once happy marriage. I think he should pay, even beyond the lawsuit and his divorce." He won't be getting a divorce, by the way, I added. His wife understood our situation and agreed to allow him to do it. She expressed doubt. You really believe that, or is it just a trick to make me look bad so he can be with you? I told her I talked to his wife this morning and shared my evidence with her. He told her he was away on a business trip. Now they're sharing a lawyer, and we even got a discount. She reflected, I wish you had been honest when I asked you how you'd react if I wanted to be with another man. You know you would have gone crazy. He knew his wife would never agree to that, I argued. I don't think you believe me even now, and that's one of the reasons we're getting a divorce. But honestly, I don't care what you believe. When you call him later, you'll find out that he's also been shown the door. So you're really kicking me out, she asked. Yes, I am. The night you revealed your plan, I went into the guest room to think. Within an hour, I knew I wanted a divorce. On Thursday, I bought the equipment I needed to gather evidence and hack into your email account. Then on Friday, I visited the lawyer and began the divorce process. She said, Why didn't you give me a heads up about your plans to divorce me? I might have reconsidered. Is there any chance you could forgive me? Linda, I loved you so much that forgiveness might have been possible, but last night was your last chance and you let it slip away. I think I could potentially forgive you, but I could never trust you again. I'd live every day wondering when you'd want to be with someone else, and I can't live like that. It's better if we just end it now. She couldn't hold back her tears. I continued, Unlike you, I've put a lot of thought into this, but every time I reach the same conclusion. I'm going to divorce you, and I'm going to make little Frankie pay for destroying my marriage. You can give him a call before you leave if you want to share a place or whatever. Just don't try to use your credit cards. I've canceled them all. I've left half of the money in our checking account for you, but I've removed my name from it. I'll split our savings with you. You can keep your car, but you'll need to handle the payments. You can take all your clothes and personal items. Once you find a place to live. You can have as much furniture as you need, but the house is mine. If I decide to sell it, I'll split the proceeds with you. It's all laid out in the divorce papers. If you choose to contest it, I'll use all the evidence I have, and it won't end well for you. I don't want to go down that road, but I will if necessary. She replied, I won't fight it. This is all my fault. I just wish I could undo it. I lightened the mood. Well, do you know the difference between a cheating wife and a light bulb? Confused, she asked, No. What's the difference? You can't have a romantic relationship with a light bulb. She didn't find it amusing at all. I informed her that it was time for her to leave, and I escorted her out of my house. While she tearfully observed, I loaded all her belongings into her car. Once everything was packed, I opened her car door and handed her one last item, her wedding ring, which I had flattened with a hammer. I told her it was now just scrap gold that she could sell for a decent price. After closing her car door, I leaned in and kissed her on the forehead, uttering my final words to her, Goodbye, my love. I then turned and walked back to my lonely house. I didn't even watch her drive away. I couldn't, as my eyes were filled with tears, and I cried for another hour until I was emotionally drained. Now it was time to consider my options. As I saw it, I had three choices. First, I could drown my sorrows in alcohol and drink myself into oblivion. However, I hardly drank and disliked the aftermath of heavy drinking, so that wasn't a viable option. Second, I could end my life and supposedly make everyone happy, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of achieving that. Third, I could stand tall, knowing I had done nothing wrong, and move forward with my life. The silver lining was the absence of Linda, which brought a smile to my face. I straightened up and, still smiling, dialed Linda's number. We made plans for dinner that evening, and I realized I was on the path to healing. As I stood upright and continued to smile, I called Linda's number once more. We arranged to meet for dinner that evening, and I sensed that I was on my way to recovery. Perhaps we'd end up as friends, or maybe I'd find someone new because the image of her still lingered in my mind.
Story 3.
I never had a fondness for playing cards. During college, some pals attempted to school me in poker, but I could never grasp it. Consequently, I never bothered to learn the hierarchy of hands or the ins and outs of Texas Hold'em or whatever it's called there. It simply didn't pique my interest. Fed up with constantly losing money to my cutthroat buddies, I gave up playing altogether. In contrast, my wife Kathy adored poker and excelled at it. She participated in local tournaments with success, though she mostly played with her regular circle of friends. They convened once or twice monthly at Larry and Sandy's suburban townhouse. Interestingly, Kathy had known them since college, Katie being her longtime friend and Sandy, her former roommate. The group comprised Larry, Sandy, Kathy, Paul, Brian, and Terry. Though present myself, Paul's wife Mary, and Brian's wife Allison refrained from playing, opting instead to watch TV in the living room. There used to be another player, Wes, but he got the boot for cheating. While I didn't object to Kathy's involvement, it was her crowd, not mine. Mary and Allison were fine, and we were even growing close. However, the others were, at best, tolerable. Interacting with them voluntarily was beyond my imagination, particularly Mark, who was an outright idiot and whom I frankly detested. Terry and Mark felt isolated. Terry, reserved and modest, didn't seem skilled at poker. Mark, on the other hand, was insufferable. If we crossed paths in public, I'd likely ignore him. His demeanor, loud, offensive, and self-absorbed, led to more than one disagreement between us. I tolerated him solely because he belonged to my wife's poker circle, encountering him only during their games. My main gripe with poker nights was how intensely competitive Katie became. If she lost, it cast a shadow over her mood the following day. Despite my attempts to address this, she dismissed my concerns. Lately, she'd been pushing for weekly poker gatherings, a prospect I wasn't keen on, a sentiment shared by Mary and Allison. Thankfully, this staved off the weekly poker plan, for now. One Saturday night at Larry and Sandy's, tensions ran high, particularly for Katie. As the night wore on, I intermittently checked on her, only to be met with her frustration. Eventually, well past the usual end time, I heard commotion from the dining room where they played. Stepping in, I caught Mark's assertion about a bet, backed by Larry's reminder of the rules. Katie reluctantly agreed, signaling her turn to play. "What's going on?" Mark asked with a smirk and a hostile glare. "Katie lost all her money, leaving me the pleasure of the final hand. She's lost, now it's time to settle up. Apologies," Katie assured. "She wouldn't do this to anyone else but me. Hey, buddy, she made a bet and lost. That's the rule." It was at that moment Katie resolved to take charge of her fate. "Henry, it's fine. I lost. I'll pay," Katie conceded. "No, Katie. You owe me loyalty. Trying to settle for less would be cheating me," Henry protested. Mark's behavior only confirmed my suspicion of his character. "You're witnessing this, so it's not betrayal," he argued. Fed up, I snapped, "Shut up, you fool! This isn't about you!" Turning to Katie, I urged, "Let's go. We're leaving." Katie hesitated. "Henry, I hate to do this, but I must. If I don't, I'll be kicked out." My response was firm. "I don't care if you're expelled. I don't care if you never play poker again." I approached Went, calling out, "Hey guys, I need your help." Katie glanced at Paul and Brian, signaling toward me with a tilt of her head. As I moved closer to her, Paul and Brian grabbed me from behind. I struggled, but Larry stepped in, assisting them in restraining me. "Are you serious? You idiots!" I exclaimed. "You're going to hold me down while my wife does this in front of me?" Larry responded calmly. "She made a bet and knew the consequences. She's choosing to stay, so she pays up." He chuckled. "Don't worry, Mark won't be around much longer. He really was an idiot." Mark then advanced, ending up directly in front of Katie, who was kneeling. "Catherine, if you go through with this, it's over," I stated calmly, emphasizing her full name. "Stop being dramatic, Henry," she retorted. As she leaned forward, I let out a loud scream, halting her. "Hold on a moment," I interjected. She paused, meeting my gaze. "I just want to be clear. Is everyone okay with this?" Silence filled the room until Mark stepped forward, dismissing my concerns. "Come on, he's spoiling the mood," he declared. Katie, leaning forward, intervened. "Okay, that's enough. I can't bear to see it anymore. Let me go, and I'll leave." With a burgeoning plan in mind, I realized it wasn't over between Katie and me. I needed to exact revenge on this fool. Katie paused, signaling to the men restraining me. They released their hold, and I calmly approached Katie. Pretending to struggle with my wedding ring, I extended my left hand with fingers spread wide, while my right hand clenched into a fist. Katie knelt determinedly to my left, while Mark grinned menacingly to my right. "I warned you, Katie. If you go through with this, we're done," I reiterated, standing beside them and locking eyes with her. "You went ahead and did it, Catherine, and with such a fool," I muttered. As I uttered this, I struck Mark in the nose with the back of my right fist, prompting him to shield his face with both hands. Swiftly, I pivoted to his right, delivering another blow with my left fist as he cowered, causing him to topple backward. His trousers and underwear pooled around his ankles, leading to a clumsy fall onto his backside and then flat onto the floor, landing between the dining table and a large antique cabinet. Fueled by anger, I acted on impulse. Katie stumbled backward, landing on her rear, while I loomed over Mark, positioned at his feet. To my right stood a spacious dining table, accommodating 8 people comfortably, with 3 chairs on each side. On my left loomed an imposing antique wardrobe, measuring at least 6 feet in length. Its oak base stood approximately 30 inches tall, adorned with numerous drawers and doors, while the top half, another 40 inches higher, boasted mirrored glass doors enclosing various collectibles such as china, Hummel figurines, and snow globes. Grabbing the top of the antique cabinet, I knew toppling it over wasn't feasible, but I hoped to instill fear. The weighty base, filled with contents, likely exceeded 300 pounds, while the top half, supported by a wooden frame, housed delicate items. Unfortunately for Mark, Larry had never properly secured the top half to the base. As I tugged on it, the top half of the cabinet teetered over. Though I hadn't intended to bring it down on Mark, I was oddly satisfied with the outcome. The ensuing crash echoed like an explosion. Fortunately for Mark, the space between the cabinet stand and the table prevented it from landing on him. Instead, the lower portion remained on the stand, while the upper part collided with the dining table. Regrettably for Mark, the contents of the cabinet cascaded forward, smashing through its glass doors. Shards of glass rained down on him, along with the items inside, resulting in numerous cuts. Thankfully, he shielded his bloodied face with his hands, preventing glass from injuring his broken nose or eyes. Unfortunately for Mark, when he hit the floor, his shirt rode up to his stomach due to his jeans and boxers being pulled down to his ankles, leaving his upper abdomen to his shins exposed. The scene unfolded rapidly, leaving everyone in stunned silence. In the midst of it all, I remained in improvisation mode. Pretending to be concerned, I circled the table where his head lay and loudly advised, "Don't touch him, get an ambulance." Upon reaching his head, I crouched so low that only he could hear me and whispered, "I hope you bleed. But if not, find me later and we'll discuss it. Just so you know, there's glass everywhere. I wouldn't move much if I were you." Sandy emerged from the kitchen announcing, "The ambulance is on its way. ETA is 5 minutes. Should we also call the police?" Katie and I responded simultaneously. She declined while I insisted, "Absolutely." Katie wasn't naive. She understood that involving the police meant filing a report and giving statements. Larry was furious. "Dude, you practically eliminated him and wrecked my cabinet. We need to call the cops," he argued. "I didn't try to eliminate him, but I agree we should call the police," I conceded. Personally, I'd welcome talking to them. "Isn't this like soliciting lovemaking for money?" I challenged. "I'll look into it. They'll never buy it," I continued. Larry countered. "Who do you think they'll believe? Me or the guy lying here half unclothed, who isn't married to any of the women?" I relented. "Maybe I'm wrong. Go ahead, call them. Do as you wish." "Please, call the police. I'll wait outside for the ambulance," I added. I circled the table and approached Katie, who was now kneeling beside Mark. Squatting down beside her, I removed my wedding ring and tossed it into the shattered glass near Mark's head. "You know what, Catherine? I don't think I'll be needing this anymore. If you want, you can fish it out of the glass." Confused, Katie looked at me with teary eyes and asked, "Cards next to his head? What are these? Extra cards?" "Wait, the guy you left your marriage for is a cheater? Are you kidding me?" I exclaimed. "Mark, you're an idiot. I almost betrayed my husband and you actually cheated?" There's a big difference between almost cheating and actually cheating. Deciding to address it later, I noted that Mark couldn't speak due to the shards of glass covering his face, with blood now splattered everywhere. "Stay here, Catherine. I'll go outside and meet the ambulance. They should be here any minute. I'll inform you when they arrive." I exited through the front door, hopped into my car, and drove off. 2 blocks down, I encountered an ambulance cruising slowly, scanning house numbers with its spotlight. Passing by, I continued on my way home. Upon arrival, I entered the house and commenced packing, anticipating the imminent arrival of the police. Gathering a small suitcase and a couple of duffel bags, I hastily tossed in essentials. Over the next few days, I completed my packing. Just as I was zipping up my suitcase, I heard Katie enter the front door, calling out, "Henry, where are you?" Ignoring her, I proceeded to leave the bedroom with my bags. "Oh, there you are," she exclaimed upon spotting me. "Henry, what are you doing? You don't have to leave," she pleaded. "God, you know." "Uh-oh," I began, addressing Mark. "I know what you did to me, Mark. What about Larry and Brian? Or do you only target married men? And you chose to kneel down instead of settling in cash. By the way, what was the bet?" Katie interjected. "Henry, stop it." Mark was the only exception, regardless of the stakes. It was a matter of principle. I didn't intend to have lovemaking with him. Plus, you intervened. "Did I stop you? You were already getting down to business," she retorted, deflecting the question. I managed to prevent them from involving the police and retrieved your ring from the shattered glass. I've said it before, I don't care. They should call the cops. Heck, I could have eliminated him. Maybe I should confess to the police, I pondered aloud. No, Henry, that's a bad idea, she cautioned. We'll cover the damages ourselves. Screw them. I won't give them a cent. When's your next poker night? I inquired. Not for a couple of weeks. Mark won't be invited back, so don't worry. We'll have time to recover, she assured. Henry, where are you going? She called out as I headed towards the door. By the time she finished speaking, I was already outside. Climbing into my car, I drove off while she stood at the front door shouting after me. Ignoring her, I drove several miles until I found a motel and booked a room for the night. I switched off my phone and spent the night staring at the ceiling. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep around 5 in the morning, awakening at 10. After showering, I paid for my stay until Wednesday at the front desk. Upon turning my phone back on, I found a dozen missed calls from Katie, along with another dozen from Allison and Mary. There were numerous messages from Katie explaining her actions and insisting it meant nothing to us. Despite regretting what happened, she tried to rationalize it, claiming it was merely a bet. I responded with a single text, suggesting she forward all her messages to her mother to gauge her perception of the situation. Then I turned off my phone again. I spent 2 hours on a park bench, followed by an hour wandering around the mall, and another hour on a different park bench. Later, I visited the supermarket and stocked up on junk food before returning to my motel room, spending the remainder of the night indulging in snacks and researching scams online. Exhausted by 10 o'clock, I drifted off to sleep. Monday morning, I attempted to focus on work, but my boss noticed my distraction and inquired about the issue. When I explained my family troubles, he suggested I take a few days off. He advised me to call on Wednesday to confirm if I needed additional time off for the rest of the week. As it was time to leave anyway, I decided to stop by the local bar and grill for a couple of beers and some better food than what I had purchased at the supermarket. Not wanting to engage with anyone, I retreated to the back of the restaurant and settled into a booth, regardless of my preference. Suddenly, 2 figures approached, neither of them the waitress. Hey, Henry, mind if Allison and I join you? One of them asked. I disregarded their presence and took a sip of ice water. Are you mad at us too? What did we do? They inquired. Nothing. You two did absolutely nothing, I replied calmly. Mary and Allison slid into the booth across from me, with Allison speaking next. Henry, if Mary and I didn't do anything, why are you upset with us? I know you're not keen on people playing poker with Katie, but I thought we were friends, she expressed. I thought so too, but you didn't do anything. Seriously, you're both asking me this, I retorted sharply, keeping my voice level. You stood by as your husband restrained me while my wife attended to another man without my consent. And you remained silent. The 2 of them sat in silence. What kind of friends are you? At one point, I looked around, pleading for someone to intervene, and you 2 said nothing. I didn't think she'd actually do it, Mary confessed. I thought it was just a dumb joke. I couldn't believe she went through with it, Allison added, expressing her remorse. She feels awful now. She's worried you might show these messages to her mom. You wouldn't, right? Not yet, but I will if necessary. Everyone knows how bad the situation was. We discussed it after you left and the ambulance took Mark away. Larry and Sandy assured they wouldn't involve the police. You'll just have to cover the damages, I explained. Listen, Mary, I'm not paying anyone anything, I declared firmly. Larry and Sandy may have helped Katie with her apparent gambling issue, but that doesn't excuse their involvement. Sandy stood by and watched while Larry actively restrained me while Katie destroyed our marriage just to avoid getting kicked out of the damn poker group. Henry, she's a mess. Please try to forgive her, Mary pleaded. I'm not sure she even wants forgiveness. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. She probably expects an apology from me for stopping her from settling her bet, I retorted. Suddenly, Allison had an idea. What if we level the playing field? What if you find someone who will satisfy you in return? I responded to her slowly and deliberately as if explaining to a child. Consider this. We were in a room, presumably among friends. Then those very friends held me back so she could settle the bet. Now, to level the playing field, I must find a woman to please me. Essentially, I embarrass myself in front of her friends, and she simply hears that I retaliated. The image of her on her knees is seared into my memory. On the flip side, she may not even believe I got even. She could just pretend it didn't happen. But I saw it. There has to be a way to put an end to this. I hate seeing my friends endure nonsense, Mary. You claim not to want to see me hurt. But were you okay with how hurt I was on Saturday? You stood by while all this unfolded. I was suffering, yet you paid no heed. Friends don't do that. We're not friends. In my view, these two were as culpable as anyone else. I've been concocting a plan for a bit of payback. I just need to set it in motion. If someone had spoken up, I'm certain this wouldn't have occurred. You could have said something to your husbands. It might have sparked a confrontation, but it could have saved my marriage. It's time to offer them some hope, but I'm unsure if there's a way to level the playing field, as you suggest. I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea, I just don't see how. What if one of us does it? I glanced at Allison for about 10 seconds. What if it's both of you? Wait, you want us to even the score? Mary asked. I can't do this. Paul will be furious if he finds out. I understand perfectly, I quipped sarcastically. The guy who restrained me while my wife betrayed me. I see everything crystal clear. I'll do it, Allison volunteered, surprising both of us. You're right. We bear some responsibility, she admitted. I can't go along with this, Mary interjected. And it's unfair of you to put me in this position, Henry. If Allison is willing to assist, that should suffice. No, I countered. The bait has been set. Now it's time to reel them in. Neither of you means anything to me. This is part of the negotiation. I don't seek balance. I demand the scales tip in my favor. Mary pondered silently for about 2 minutes. The longer she deliberated, the more confident I grew in handling the situation. If we agree to this, will you forgive Katie? She asked finally. If you refuse, I won't even consider it. You won't tell Paul? She continued. I won't utter a word, I assured her. Technically, it wasn't a lie. I hadn't planned to verbalize it. With a motel room booked until Wednesday morning, I intended to hold out until the weekend before deciding whether to return home or seek a new place. I can't believe this is happening, Mary exclaimed. Welcome to my world, I retorted sarcastically. Look, if it's that awful for you, just let it go, I suggested. That's not the issue, Henry. I care about you and you're a good guy. If I weren't married, I'd be with you in a heartbeat. But I am married. You're pushing me into cheating on my husband, Mary explained. Mary, I'm not forcing you into anything, I clarified. I know. All right. If it helps you move past what my husband did, then I'll do it. Either way, it's his fault. If he wasn't an idiot, I wouldn't be in this situation. As for me, she can justify it however she wants. It's my way of getting back at her damn husband, so I don't care, I thought to myself. Okay, let's meet tomorrow evening in my room at 6 o'clock. I'll bring some food and wine, I proposed. Both women rose from the table and departed, engaged in conversation. They seemed eager for tomorrow night and not at all upset. Am I the only one who takes marriage vows seriously? I know what you're thinking. Here I am, a married guy planning to date 2 married women, all while preaching about the sanctity of marriage, I reflected. But she cheated on me. By doing that, she disrespected and embarrassed me. Our marriage was already null and void. I no longer honored those vows. It was all over except for the paperwork and the women I was about to meet. They and their husbands were partly responsible, so to hell with them. I'll never understand those people whose spouses cheat, yet they insist on upholding the sanctity of marriage. Blah, blah, blah. My motto is, what's good for the goose? I acknowledge that she didn't intend to betray me, but it wasn't hard for her to agree to it when her coveted spot in the poker group was at stake. Yes, I may be unreasonable. Yes, she needs assistance with her gambling issue. However, she may not seek help until she hits rock bottom. Maybe divorce is that rock bottom. The following day, Tuesday, I returned to my hometown, ensuring Katie wasn't present, and entered to gather some new belongings. It was tough walking through my house, seeing remnants of my life everywhere, knowing it would never be the same. Each time sentimentality crept in, I envisioned her kneeling in front of Mark. The anger remained potent, so I opted not to take anything that might remind me of her. I grabbed some electronics, my laptop, iPad, camera, along with basic tools and clothing. I resolved to start apartment hunting after leaving and return later for the remaining items. I didn't need much. Departing the house, I scouted for apartments and found an affordable furnished 1-bedroom unit available for monthly rent. I could move in any time after Saturday. After finalizing the lease, I went for lunch and prepared to meet the girls. At Best Buy, I purchased an Apple SD card reader and a dozen SD cards. I also acquired the cheapest wireless color printer they had. Then I visited a liquor store and picked up a couple of bottles of wine I knew Mary and Allison favored. I returned to the motel room and arranged my belongings to create a cluttered appearance, strategically placing the 35mm camera for an unobstructed view of the bed. Due to the room's disarray, The camera remained inconspicuous. Around 5:30, I ordered appetizers from a nearby restaurant, which arrived just before 6. At 6:15, a gentle knock sounded on the door. Peering through the peephole, I ensured it was the women and not irate husbands. I wasn't particularly fearful of my own husband, but I preferred not to be caught off guard again. I activated the camera to record and welcomed the women inside, offering them wine. Initially hesitant, they eventually accepted, reasoning that a bit of liquid courage wouldn't hurt. Ladies, we don't have to do this. We can simply enjoy wine, food, and each other's company. You both know I would never pressure you into anything you're not comfortable with, I asserted. I understand, Henry, Allison replied. You're such a kind person. It's a shame Brian isn't as considerate as you. Katie truly lucked out. Mary and I have discussed this since we parted ways yesterday. You were correct. Our silence was a failure on our part. By not speaking up, we were taking action. I deeply regret our inaction. I appreciate that. I just want to understand where I went wrong, I replied. What do you mean, what you did wrong, Mary? It's hard to believe Katie made such a sudden decision. If she intended to involve me, she should have done so before I arrived. I simply want to know what I did to make her think this was acceptable. Henry, I truly believe Saturday was the first time something like this happened. It's impossible to keep something like this a secret. The truth always surfaces, Mary explained, unsure how accurate her statement was. All right, let's get started, Allison interjected eagerly. You go to the bed and stand. Following her instructions, I positioned myself as she directed. I'll undress you now. Stay still. No hands. I want to do this myself. Meanwhile, Mary settled into the office chair by the desk, wearing a broad smile. It made me wonder if these two had experience with such encounters. Mary positioned herself perfectly to record everything on video. Allison unbuttoned my shirt, sliding it down my arms, leaving them extended outwards. With a wide grin, she ran her hands over my chest. She then untied my shoes, having me lift each foot for removal, followed by taking off my socks. Proceeding, she unbuckled my belt, unbuttoned my jeans, and pulled them down over my hips. Once my jeans were off, Allison knelt in front of me. Though I wanted to hasten the process, I restrained myself, allowing her to proceed at her pace, which was remarkable. Fortunately, Brian was lucky as it didn't take long. When she finished, she knelt back and looked up at me. Tenderly, I leaned down and kissed her forehead. That was incredible, Allison. Absolutely incredible. Mary, I'll need a moment to recharge the batteries, I quipped. We settled down, indulging in some of the food and wine we had brought along. During our meal, we revisited the events of Saturday night after I left Larry and Sandy's. Allison spoke up first. You were there when Katie discovered the cards near Mark's shoulder and accused him of cheating. Initially, he struggled to speak as glass rained down on him, fearing it might enter his injured nose or mouth. Mary chimed in next. His reaction when the ambulance arrived was priceless, albeit delayed. It took a bit longer than expected for them to pry his hands away from his face. He looked dreadful, to say the least. So much for, I'll go meet the ambulance, Allison remarked, mimicking me with a smirk. I replied, feigning forgetfulness. Must have slipped my mind. Unfortunately, he managed to pull through. Mary shuddered at the memory. Then he goes on about not cheating, claiming Katie owes him a bet and how he'll seek retribution. Blah, 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 Allison added. And the blood, oh, the blood, she continued. It was everywhere. The EMTs didn't even attempt to clean him up. They just covered him and whisked him away. Mary took matters into her own hands. Katie insisted she wouldn't settle their bet unless he could prove he didn't cheat. At this point, I interjected, so if Mark proves he's innocent, she'll still honor the bet? A significant pause followed as the girls fell silent. Then Mary resumed. I don't think there's much cause for concern right now. Are you absolutely certain? I responded. As I mentioned, Mark sustained numerous cuts all over his body. Most were minor, but he had a couple of deeper cuts on his abdomen requiring stitches. He remained hospitalized until Monday to have all the glass removed. Larry visited him at the hospital and had a conversation with him, Allison added. He was livid, threatening to not only collect the bet from Katie, but also to engage in carnal activities with her right in front of you. Mary intervened once more, stating, I highly doubt Mark will be welcome back given his cheating. However, Larry's also upset with you. He believes you're liable for the damaged curio cabinet and is frustrated that his homeowner's insurance will need to cover the hospital expenses. Additionally, he expects you to reimburse for the broken items in the cabinet. Mary, relay my message. Inform Larry and Sandy that I'll only settle for $0.10 if instructed by the judge. Legal documents and testimonies will be provided to support this. My statement will depict the situation as if I stumbled upon a full-blown orgy, and when I intervened to stop my wife's involvement, I was unlawfully restrained by Larry, Brian, and Paul. It will include the names of all participants and witnesses present. Copies will be distributed to neighbors, family, friends, colleagues, and even churches attended by anyone involved. If possible, I'll reach out to Oprah and share the story with the world. We sat in silence for about half a minute until Mary exclaimed, "All right, it's my turn, let's do this." "Sure, but I want both of you unclothed too," I insisted. "We don't have to be undressed for this," Allison chuckled. "I know we don't have to, but I feel a bit awkward," I responded. "Forget about it," Mary exclaimed. "We've come this far. What's the difference?" With that, she undressed, and Allison followed suit. I stood at the edge of the bed once more, and this time it was Mary who knelt down without hesitation. I was trying to distract myself from the situation and prolong the process when Allison rose from her chair, pushed me onto the bed, leaving Mary on her knees. I landed on my back as Allison jumped onto the bed. After about 5 minutes, it seemed to be winding down when Mary interjected, "All right, it's my turn now. Allison, move over so I can join." Allison giggled, rolled aside, and Mary took her place. Eventually, Mary rolled off and lay beside me. So I asked, "Have you done this before?" "We had our moments. You know we went to college together, right?" "Well, we had a few experiences," Mary recounted. "That's right, Mary," Allison chuckled. "A few times," Mary corrected, laughing. "More like 100, Mary added before saying, "Okay, it was fun, but I should head out. Henry, I hope this helps tip the scales in your favor. Please call me tomorrow and let me know what you think. I really hope you two can get through this. I don't want to lose you as friends." Allison chimed in, "Henry, we're truly sorry we didn't speak up when everything was happening. Please call me tomorrow so we can talk. And if you need to talk later, you can call me anytime." Just to be clear, this was probably the only solution, I stated. "Probably?" Mary questioned. "Come on, Mary, that's all we've been discussing since last night. You know we'll do it again. We just need to be more discreet than doing it in front of everyone during a poker game. Agreed?" "Agreed," I chuckled. "We'll talk tomorrow. I'll call you someday." With that, the girls left, and I began working on the video I had made. I edited it down to the risque parts and printed out some compromising still photos of both women. Then I copied the edited video onto the remaining SD cards and prepared 9 identical envelopes, each containing an SD card and several explicit photos of the girls. Although it would have been obvious to anyone familiar with us, I cropped the photos and blurred the video to conceal my face. Afterward, I went to bed and quickly fell asleep. Wednesday morning, I woke up early, turned my phone back on, and noticed another dozen missed calls and messages from Katie. I didn't listen to or read them, but I also didn't delete them. I called my boss and informed him I'd be taking the rest of the week off, then returned home after Katie had left for work to pack up more of my tools and personal belongings. During lunch, Katie called me again. This time I answered the call curtly, saying, "What?" Her response was delayed as she seemed taken aback that I had actually picked up. "Oh my God, Henry, please don't hang up. Where are you? We need to talk. We can work through this. Please just talk to me. Where did you stop? Please come home so we can resolve this. Please." Interrupting her, I said, "Katie, just listen for a moment. We'll meet on Saturday. I'll be there at 6 p.m. Make sure everyone who was with Larry and Sandy is there, except your guy. If he shows up, I'll deal with him again. He's not my guy, Henry. Besides, he's not really up for going out right now. As you say, Saturday at 6 o'clock. This isn't a party, it's a discussion. You and your friends can try to convince me why I shouldn't divorce you. I haven't listened to your messages, so be prepared for what you have to say. Tell your friends not to be late. Henry, please don't jeopardize our marriage over a trivial debt. When's the next poker night? Not sure, maybe in a couple more weeks. You don't have to attend if you don't want to. See you on Saturday." "All right. Henry, I love you. Please come back home. See you on Saturday." She simply couldn't grasp it. She believed the issue was merely my exaggerated reaction to what she perceived as fulfilling her obligation. She failed to perceive the larger picture. She genuinely didn't recognize her problem. Honoring the poker bet seemed more crucial to her than upholding our marriage vows. She hasn't reached her lowest point yet. The remainder of the week passed relatively calmly. I went to Walmart and purchased items necessary for my new apartment's bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom. I ended up buying more items than anticipated. Then I checked into a motel for the night. My evenings were spent researching divorce. We didn't have children, and with the house sale, we could each expect about $15,000. Our debts were minimal, and our incomes were similar. It should be relatively straightforward. On Saturday afternoon, I messaged Katie, requesting her to text me when everyone had gathered. I didn't want to endure an awkward silence while waiting for someone to arrive or have to rehash everything if someone was late. At 5:45, she messaged that everyone was already assembled and waiting in the dining room. At 5:55, I rang the doorbell of our house. "Honey, it's your house." "No need to ring the doorbell," Katie mentioned, opening the door. "As you wish," I replied, passing by her. As I stepped into the dining room, I carried a small duffel bag stuffed with envelopes. All the dining furniture was passed down by Grandma Katie. The table was quite spacious for 10 people, with 4 chairs on each side and 1 at each end. Upon my arrival, 3 empty seats were beside me. Larry occupied the far right seat, while Sandy sat on the left with his back turned. To Sandy's left were 3 vacant seats beside Larry's right. Facing me were Paul, then Brian, followed by Mary, and finally Allison. Positioned at the head of the table to the left sat Terry. Katie brushed past me and settled in the middle of the 3 empty seats, hoping I'd take the seat next to her. I headed to the left end of the table where Terry was seated and stated, "This is my spot." Katie suggested, "You could sit next to me, Henry. Let's bet her on BJ that I'll sit here. Who knows, it might lead to something." "Katie, put your phone on record. I've got a hunch you'll need it someday." Without a word, Terry stood and shifted to the other side of Katie. An empty seat was to my right, where I placed my gym bag. Katie activated the recording app on her iPhone and positioned it on the table. Taking my seat, I surveyed the table. Following an uneasy silence, I addressed the gathering. "All right, we all know why we're here. I'm contemplating divorcing Catherine. If any of you care to persuade me otherwise, now's your chance. Terry, why don't you start?" "Look, Henry, I may not be the best person to advise on this. My wife cheated on me, and it led to our divorce. I'm truly sorry you're going through this." Clearly, Terry hadn't come prepared for the meeting. "Thanks, Terry. I appreciate your candor. I might have more questions later." I glanced around at the faces seated at the table. "Larry, what's your take on this?" I inquired. "It's no issue for me. She adores you, and she's gorgeous. Did you expect her to be a saint when you met her?" "No," I responded, "but I hoped she'd aspire to be one. Would you be okay if Sandy entertained other men after we got together?" Larry fell silent, and Sandy squirmed in her chair. With my trademark sarcasm and purely in jest, I quipped, "So, how long have you two been openly cheating on each other?" Sandy blushed, and jaws dropped all around except for Larry's, who shot me a piercing look but remained silent. Katie blurted out, "Sandy, really?" Suddenly, Sandy had an honesty outburst. "We only did it 3 times. I hate it, but Larry insists we continue. I want to stop. I despise this." "All right, Sandy," I responded calmly. "Why don't you and Catherine discuss this later? You shouldn't feel pressured to do anything you're not comfortable with." "You know what an idiot you are," Larry erupted. "I warned Katie when she started dating you, and you couldn't handle poker, that you were an idiot and she should dump you. She should have left you long ago. You wrecked thousands of dollars worth of stuff in my house because your wife honored the bet. Maybe I should just trash everything here." "Come on," I replied calmly. "All this furniture belonged to your friend Catherine's grandmother. It means nothing to me." He sank back into his chair, breathing heavily, his glare fixed on me like a dagger. "Paul, Brian, any input from you guys?" "Listen, man," Paul started. "None of us want to see our friends split up. I mean, you guys have been part of our circle for years," I interjected. "No, Paul, you're not friends with us. You're friends with Catherine, and I'm her husband." "But you are friends with my wife," he argued. "That's what I thought. And then she just stood there silently while you 3 held me down, and my wife knelt in front of the other guy. But Mary didn't do anything. It was us." I glanced at Mary and Allison, who avoided my gaze and stared at the table. It seemed this conversation didn't unfold as they had hoped. "Answer me, Paul. You walk into a bar and spot your buddy Brian's wife in the far corner, on her knees in front of another guy. What do? You look. Do you call Brian and hope he arrives in time? Do you step in to stop her? Now imagine you're at the bar and you spot Brian in the same position. What do? Are you calling Allison? The thing is, I already know the answers. If it's Brian's wife, you intervene and inform Brian. If Brian's the one in the situation, you probably stay put and maybe even join in. Allison won't hear about it from you because Brian is your friend and Allison is your friend's wife. And what about you, Brian? Do you think I'm exaggerating?" Brian remained silent. "You see, the issue here is that Katie is your friend, not me. If Katie were to attack me, you wouldn't care because I'm just your friend's husband. I'm not your friend. If I hadn't walked into this room, none of you would have said a word to me. You'd all be thinking, all right, the ice is broken. Next time, I'll be the one making a bet with her. I glanced at Katie. When did you lose respect for me? What do you mean, honey? I respect you more than anyone else I've ever known. When did I first tell you that this was acceptable? Well, I never claimed it was, she replied softly. How many times did this occur before last week? What? Never? Why are you so surprised by this question? Why should I trust you? If I hadn't witnessed it, would you have informed me? Would you wait until we got home and casually mention, hey, honey, something odd happened at the card game tonight? That's the issue, Katie. You were ready to jeopardize our marriage, but not your cherished spot in the poker group. I came second to these idiots. I can't reconcile with that. I turned to Brian and Paul. You guys knew Katie would prioritize her damn poker spot over her marriage, and you encouraged her instead of reasoning with her. I addressed Brian and Paul, then turned to them. What would you do if you had to watch your wives with another man? They smirked and exchanged glances before facing me. Is she getting paid for this? Inquired Paul. Mary's jaw dropped. Not to be outdone, Brian chimed in. Will she gain any new skills? I simply grinned. So, when's the next poker game? They murmured to each other for a while. Then Brian asked, Are you interested? No, I replied. When's the next poker game? Catherine, I'm baffled why you're saying you won't return, yet you keep inquiring about the next gathering. Okay, I've had it. Let me lay it out. I retrieved my gym bag and emptied all the envelopes. Tonight, I was about to shatter a couple of marriages, but you know what? I believe they're already on the rocks. I stowed the envelopes back and replaced the bag. Catherine, you tore my heart out and actually enlisted your friends to restrain me while you did it. And you still don't see any wrongdoing? You not only betrayed me, but also shamelessly humiliated me. Clearly, your poker group status means more to you than I do. But the worst part, Catherine, is that these people aren't your friends. Real friends wouldn't subject you to this or allow you to inflict this on yourself. Katie started to interject. No, darling, you mean everything. Take it easy, Catherine. It's my turn now. You didn't even apologize. All you did was rationalize why you should settle your debts. You kept insisting we needed to move past this, yet you never acknowledged any wrongdoing. Even after all this, you still plan to attend poker nights. If you're willing to gamble carnal favors while I'm present, what would you wager when I'm not? Am I supposed to raise another person's child because you lost a bet and someone else impregnated you? We're through. You have a gambling issue. Seek help. I'll consult a lawyer on Monday. If you want your own attorney, go ahead. As far as I'm concerned, you can have almost everything, including your misguided friends. What an idiot you are, Brian remarked. Screw you, Brian, Allison retorted, surprising everyone. He's right about everything. You guys are wrecking his marriage to Katie for your own entertainment. He was on the verge of exposing you, claiming I slept with him, and I don't know why he didn't. You know I did. Henry, can I catch a ride with you? Another awkward silence lingered for about 10 seconds before Mary spoke up. You know what, Paul? I've had it, Mary asserted. I'm tired of carrying all the weight in this relationship. Henry's spot on. You hardly even sit by my side. Back before all this mess, Henry looked up to her. I always wished you'd treat me the way he treated her. It's the first time I've seen them not sitting together, not touching, not holding hands. It really infuriates me that you facilitated all this, Henry, she continued. Last Saturday, when it all went down, I was just as stunned as you were. I honestly thought it was some sick joke because I believe she loved you deeply. I'm truly sorry I didn't speak up then, but perhaps it's better for you to find out now, especially since you don't have children. Can I hitch a ride with you? We departed the house with Katie sobbing uncontrollably, Larry and Sandy bickering over the swing, and Paul and Brian exchanging threats of, if you don't come home today, don't bother coming back at all. Both girls stormed out, flipping the bird. I dropped off Allison and Mary at Allison's parents' house and returned to my motel. I polished off the remaining hard drinks in the room and devoured the last of the junk food. I eventually drifted off around midnight. The divorce proceeded smoothly. We sold the house and she stashed all the furniture in storage. I got everything I desired from a surprisingly modest house. Allison and Mary split from their spouses, and the three of us maintained a friends with benefits arrangement. Katie has been silent. Frankly, I was let down. I expected her to put up more of a fight, maybe push for counseling. Clearly, marriage meant less to her than it did to me. While I never developed romantic feelings for Mary or Allison individually, the three of us grew very close. A year after the infamous incident, I found myself in the bar Katya and I used to frequent for special occasions. The divorce had been finalized 4 months prior. As I sat there nursing my beer and missing Katya, I sensed someone behind me. I kept my gaze fixed on the wall, hoping they'd leave. I really wasn't in the mood to chat and wished they'd take the hint. Mind if I join you? I kept my head down, focusing on my drink. Sure, go ahead, have a seat. A nice guy like you, I'm surprised you're here by yourself. Well, I usually hang out with 2 wonderful friends, but they're on a double date. Funny you mention friends. Turns out mine weren't as great as I thought. I happened upon a couple of girls who mentioned there'd be a handsome, kind-hearted guy flying solo at this bar. Figured I'd come introduce myself. I'm Katie. I chuckled and played along. Pleasure to meet you, Katie. I'm Henry. Why are you here alone? Celebrating something? No, nothing to celebrate. I'm a relationship failure. Couldn't prevent my wife from cheating, so we divorced. My 2 closest friends are with other people. And you? Well, maybe I'm a failure too. Had the world's best boyfriend, loved me deeply, but I hurt him terribly. Cheated, and he divorced me. Did he do what was best for him or for me? Let's start with him. Not sure. You'd have to ask him. People say he's unhappy all the time. And you? It's been tough. His divorce plunged me into the darkest period of my life. Forced me to examine myself closely. Didn't like what I found. Started dependency counseling then and have kept at it since. My husband saw it coming, tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. In that sense, divorce was probably inevitable. My dependency would have eventually eroded his love for me. I never stopped loving you, Kat. Couldn't. I know, Henry. I get it. First, it's nice to hear you call me Katie or Kat again, not Catherine. I came to explain my actions and assure you it's not your fault. I know you know this, but I needed to say it. That poker night, I was sure I'd win. When I didn't, I paid up. Didn't even see it as cheating. Like a handshake. I worried they might ostracize me from the group. I never viewed it as a gamble on our marriage since I never imagined you'd leave. It never crossed my mind. I anticipated your anger, followed by forgiveness, seeing it as my duty. I believed you'd understand my need to honor my word. Frankly, I didn't think it was a big deal. But now I realize it's the most despicable, repulsive thing I've ever done to someone. Back then, I couldn't comprehend your seemingly irrational behavior. During therapy, when I recounted the fight and how you insisted I document it, the doctor praised your approach, calling you a genius. She expressed surprise at the endurance of our marriage. She also clarified why you were so fixated on the next poker night. Just so you're aware, there haven't been any more poker nights. I haven't touched a deck of cards since that evening, and I never will again. I haven't communicated with any of those guys since a couple of weeks after our argument. How's Sandy holding up? She's doing okay. She and Larry ended up divorcing. Turns out he was a terrible idiot, and she felt too embarrassed to speak up. Eventually, she decided to leave him. Now she's dating a coworker. Henry, you were spot on about everything. I prioritized this foolish poker group over everything else. I loved you wholeheartedly, and I knew you felt the same. I was confident you'd understand and be okay with it. If these people were genuine friends, things wouldn't have spiraled like this. I couldn't resist the pull of being part of that group. Allowing that idiot Mark to do what he did makes me sick with myself. Without your actions, I shudder to think how those games would have evolved. I'm deeply sorry for all the pain I caused you. I genuinely wish you a wonderful life. You deserve it. I'd genuinely like to maintain a friendship with you, but I understand if you're not up for it. I'll leave now before I start blubbering like a child. Give me a call. Katie rose and headed toward the door. Hey, Kat, I called after her. She paused but didn't turn back. Yes, Henry? Her shoulders trembled with tears. Have you eaten dinner yet? No, Henry, not yet, she replied, still facing away. I rose, approached her, wrapped my arm around her shoulders, guided her head to my shoulder, and led her to the door. Let's go grab a proper dinner. Katie and I rekindled our relationship, and a few months later we moved back in together. 9 months after that, we remarried at the courthouse, opting to keep the same anniversary date. True to her word, Katie gave up gambling entirely, even abstaining from joking bets. While some might say once a cheater, always a cheater, I don't believe that applies to Katie. I see her actions through the lens of her dependency, understanding that it led her to behavior she wouldn't otherwise engage in. Her motives weren't to shame me or seek another partner. She was battling her dependency. The guys from the poker group remained friends, except for Terry, who distanced himself. As for Mark, I never heard from him again. It seems he chose to leave town to avoid further discussion on the matter. Katie and I maintain friendships with Sandy, Allison, and Mary. Sandy has also quit playing poker. They've all agreed to be godmothers to our son.
Story 4.
Mark Ramsey stared out the window of his corner office, Seattle's skyline a blur through the rain-speckled glass. At 35, he had what many would consider a perfect life. Project manager at a thriving tech firm, married to Amanda, a marketing executive for a well-known fashion brand for 5 years. No kids, but their life seemed full of joy and comfort. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, him and Amanda at their favorite restaurant, both smiling widely. It had been taken just last month, during one of their regular date nights. The routine they'd settled into felt comfortable, predictable in the best way. His phone buzzed. A text from Amanda, "Don't forget, we're trying that new Italian place tonight. Can't wait to see you. Love you." Mark smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. Even after 5 years, Amanda still made him feel like the luckiest man alive. He quickly typed back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Love you too." As he turned back to his computer, diving into another round of project reports, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. He was determined to climb the corporate ladder, to provide the best life possible for him and Amanda. The long hours were worth it, he told himself, because it was all for their future. Later that evening, as they sat across from each other at the restaurant, candlelight flickering between them, Mark reached out and took Amanda's hand. "To us," he said, raising his wine glass with his free hand. Amanda's smile was radiant as she clinked her glass against his. "To us, and to many more years of happiness." As they talked and laughed over dinner, sharing stories about their day and making plans for their upcoming weekend getaway, Mark felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was what he worked so hard for, these moments of connection, of shared joy. Little did he know, beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to form in the foundation of their seemingly perfect life. 6 months later, Mark found himself once again working late into the night. The office was quiet, most of his colleagues having left hours ago. But he barely noticed the passage of time, engrossed in preparing for a critical client presentation the next day. His phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. Another late night? Mark glanced at the clock, wincing when he saw it was past 10 p.m. He quickly typed back, "Sorry, big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up." There was a long pause before Amanda's reply came through. "K." That single letter spoke volumes. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew Amanda was frustrated with his long hours, but he was so close to landing a major account. If he could just push through for a few more weeks. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the distance between Mark and Amanda grew. Their once lively dinner conversations dwindled into silence. Weekend getaways became a thing of the past, replaced by Mark's constant need to catch up on work. Amanda, once so communicative and affectionate, had become cold and distant. Mark couldn't remember the last time they'd been intimate. 6 months? Maybe longer. He told himself it was just stress, that things would get better once this big project was over. One night, Mark came home late as usual, expecting to find Amanda already asleep. Instead, he found her sitting in the dark living room, illuminated only by the glow of her phone. "Hey," he said cautiously, setting down his briefcase. "Everything okay?" Amanda looked up, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Just working late," she said, her voice flat. "Like you." Before Mark could respond, she stood up and brushed past him, heading for their bedroom. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Mark alone in the darkened room. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. When had things gotten so bad between them? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Amanda, but he didn't know how to fix it. Work had become his constant companion, his source of validation. How could he step back now, when he was so close to achieving everything he'd worked for? As he sat there in the quiet house, Mark made a silent promise to himself. Once this big project was over, he'd make things right with Amanda. They'd go on a vacation, reconnect, rebuild what they'd lost. He just needed a little more time. But time, as Mark would soon learn, was not on his side. It was a quiet Tuesday night. Mark had fallen into an exhausted sleep around 10 p.m., his mind still churning with work-related stress. Amanda had texted earlier to say she was working late, something that had become increasingly common over the past few months. Mark hadn't thought much of it, too tired to notice the growing disconnect between them. The shrill ring of his phone shattered the silence, jolting Mark from his fitful sleep. He fumbled for the device, squinting at the bright screen. 1 a.m. An unknown number. Confused and still half asleep, Mark answered. "Hello, Mr. Ramsey?" A deep, authoritative voice came through the line. This is Officer Johnson with the Seattle Police Department. Mark sat up, instantly alert. His heart began to race. Yes, this is Mark Ramsey. What's going on? There was a pause on the other end of the line, heavy with unspoken tension. Then, Mr. Ramsey, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife, Amanda Ramsey, has been arrested for solicitation. The words didn't register at first. Mark blinked, sure he had misheard. Solicitation? I don't understand. There must be some mistake. I'm afraid not, sir, Officer Johnson replied, his tone sympathetic but firm. Your wife was caught in a sting operation attempting to engage in prostitution. The room seemed to spin. Mark gripped the edge of the bed, struggling to process what he was hearing. Amanda? His Amanda? The woman he'd built a life with, who he thought he knew better than anyone in the world. This can't be right, Mark stammered. Where is she? Is she okay? She's currently being held at the downtown precinct, Officer Johnson explained. She's physically unharmed, but understandably upset. You can come down to the station if you'd like to see her and discuss bail options. Mark's mind reeled. Bail? Prostitution? How had his life unraveled so completely in a single phone call? I'll be right there, he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. As he hung up the phone, Mark sat motionless on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The life he thought he knew, the marriage he believed in, had just been shattered into a million pieces. With shaking hand, he began to dress. As he moved through the motions, a torrent of questions flooded his mind. How long had this been going on? Why would Amanda do this? Had their entire marriage been a lie? The drive to the police station was a blur. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He kept expecting to wake up to find that this was all some twisted nightmare. But as he pulled into the parking lot of the precinct, the harsh reality of the situation began to sink in. His wife, the woman he pledged to love and cherish for the rest of his life, had been arrested for prostitution. The foundation of trust their marriage had been built on crumbled beneath his feet. In its place, a chasm of betrayal and lies yawned wide. As Mark walked into the station, his mind spun with unanswered questions and a growing sense of anger. He was about to come face to face with a side of Amanda he never knew existed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Mark's footsteps echoed in the sterile hallway of the police station. Each step felt like a mile, his mind still reeling from the phone call that had shattered his world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mock the darkness creeping into his heart. Officer Johnson led him to a small room, his hand hesitating on the doorknob. She's in here, Mr. Ramsey. Take as much time as you need. The door creaked open, revealing a sight that made Mark's stomach lurch. Amanda sat hunched at a metal table, her wrists bound by cold steel. Her mascara had left dark trails down her cheeks, and her usually perfect hair was a disheveled mess. She looked small, vulnerable, nothing like the confident woman he thought he knew. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on. Mark's mind raced, 1,000 questions fighting to be the first one asked. But when he finally opened his mouth, only one word came out. Why? Amanda flinched at the raw pain in his voice. She kept her eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet his gaze. I'm sorry, Mark, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I've been seeing other men. I've been doing this for months. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, reality warping around him. Months, he repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. What do you mean, months? How could you? His voice broke, anger and hurt warring for dominance. Why would you do this? Amanda's shoulders hunched further, as if trying to make herself as small as possible. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of shame and defiance. I wasn't happy, Mark, she said, her voice gaining strength. You're never home. We haven't touched each other in months. You shut me out, and I felt so lonely. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. When I met those men, it was the only time I felt alive again. Mark recoiled as if she'd slapped him. So you threw away our marriage because I've been working hard to provide for us? He spat, his voice rising. You let strangers touch you. For what? Because you were bored. Amanda's eyes flashed, a spark of the woman he used to know breaking through. I needed something you couldn't give me anymore, she replied, her words cutting deep. I didn't care if I had to go to the streets. I felt more desired by strangers than I ever did by you. The air seemed to leave the room. Mark stared at her, unable to reconcile this bitter, angry woman with the loving wife he thought he knew. How long, he asked, his voice hollow. How long have you been doing this? Amanda looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. 6 months, she admitted quietly. At first, it was just flirting. Harmless attention. But then, she trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Mark's mind reeled. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayal. Every late night at the office, every text message he hadn't questioned at all took on a sinister new meaning. Who else knows? He demanded, suddenly terrified of the scandal that could be brewing. Amanda shook her head. No one. I was careful. Or, I thought I was. She laughed bitterly. Guess I wasn't careful enough. Mark paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. His world was crumbling around him, and he had no idea how to stop it. What happens now? He asked, more to himself than to Amanda. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. I don't know, she admitted. But Mark, please. I need your help. I can't go to jail. It would ruin everything. For a moment, Mark was tempted. The instinct to protect her, ingrained over years of marriage, reared its head. But then he remembered the cold calculation in her voice when she spoke of feeling desired by strangers. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. You should have thought of that before you decided to sell yourself on the streets, he said, his voice cold. You made your choices, Amanda. Now you get to live with the consequences. He turned to leave, unable to look at her any longer. As his hand touched the doorknob, Amanda's voice stopped him. Mark, she called, desperation clear in her tone. Please, I love you. We can fix this. He paused, considering her words. Then, without turning around, he spoke. No, Amanda, we can't. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. With that, he walked out, leaving behind the shattered remains of their marriage. As the door closed behind him, Mark felt a strange sense of finality. The life he had known was over. What came next, he had no idea. A week after that fateful night at the police station, Mark found himself sitting in a stark office, staring at a stack of papers that would end his marriage. The divorce attorney across from him spoke in a low, sympathetic tone, but Mark barely heard the words. His mind was still reeling from the events of the past week. He'd moved out of their shared apartment, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner. The small loft he'd rented closer to his office felt empty, impersonal, a fitting reflection of the hollowness in his chest. As he mechanically signed page after page, Mark's mind drifted back to the happy moments he and Amanda had shared. The day he proposed, on a sunny afternoon in the park. Their wedding day, her smile radiant as she walked down the aisle. Lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the paper and planning their future. All of it felt tainted now, corrupted by the knowledge of Amanda's betrayal. Had any of it been real? Or had she been playing a part all along, biding her time until she could find someone better? The attorney's voice broke through his reverie. Mr. Ramsey, we're finished here. Do you have any questions? Mark blinked, looking down at the signed papers. It seemed surreal that 5 years of marriage could be dissolved so quickly, reduced to nothing more than a stack of legal documents. No, he said, his voice hoarse. No questions. As he left the office, divorce papers tucked under his arm, Mark felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. But there was something else, too. A sense of resolve, of determination. He wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Amanda had made her choices, had gambled everything they had built together for fleeting moments of pleasure. Now it was time for her to face the consequences. Mark's jaw clenched as he stepped out onto the busy Seattle street. He was going to take control of his life again, starting with his career and ending with Amanda's fate. She had no idea what was coming. Over the next few weeks, Mark threw himself into his work with a fervor that surprised even his most ambitious colleagues. He arrived at the office before dawn and often stayed well past midnight, fueled by a potent mixture of caffeine and righteous anger. His boss noticed the change, praising his dedication and hinting at a possible promotion. But Mark barely registered the compliments. His mind was focused on a single goal: success. Not just for himself, but as a form of revenge against Amanda. He would build the life she had thrown away, would become the man she had deemed not good enough. And when he was done, when he had climbed to heights she could only dream of, he would make sure she understood exactly what she had lost. As the days turned into weeks, Mark's pain began to harden into something colder, more calculated. He started gathering information, calling in favors from contacts in the industry. Amanda's arrest hadn't made the news yet, but Mark knew it was only a matter of time. He hired the best divorce attorney in the city, instructing them to be as aggressive as possible in the settlement negotiations. Amanda had destroyed their marriage. He would make sure she walked away with nothing. Late one night, as Mark sat in his empty loft reviewing case files, his phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. "Can we talk? Please? I miss you." For a moment, his finger hovered over the reply button. A part of him, buried deep beneath layers of hurt and anger, still yearned for the connection they once had. But then he remembered her cold words in the police station, the callous way she had dismissed their years together. With a decisive swipe, he deleted the message. Then, after a moment's consideration, he blocked her number entirely. There would be no reconciliation, no second chances. Amanda had made her bed. Now she would have to lie in it. As he turned back to his work, Mark felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The path ahead was clear. He would rebuild his life, brick by brick, and make sure Amanda understood the full weight of her actions. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. While Mark focused on rebuilding his life, Amanda's world continued to crumble around her. The news of her arrest, initially contained to police reports and courthouse whispers, finally broke in the local media. The headlines were brutal, splashing her mugshot across newspapers and websites. Marketing executive caught in prostitution sting. From boardroom to street corner, the fall of Amanda Ramsey. Amanda sat in her living room, curtains drawn against the prying eyes of neighbors and reporters, scrolling through the endless stream of articles on her phone. Each one felt like another nail in the coffin of her once promising career. Her company, the fashion brand she had worked so hard to climb the ranks of, wasted no time in distancing themselves from the scandal. The termination email arrived less than an hour after the first news report, citing her criminal charges as a breach of conduct. As she read the cold, impersonal words ending her employment, Amanda felt a wave of nausea wash over her. It wasn't just a job she had lost. It was her identity, her sense of self-worth, her entire future. The men she had been seeing, the ones who had made her feel alive and desired when Mark's attention had waned, vanished overnight. Texts went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. The thrill of illicit encounters was replaced by a crushing sense of loneliness. Her friends, once so eager to share in her success, now avoided her calls. Social media became a minefield of judgment and mockery. Comments ranged from faux concern to outright cruelty, each one chipping away at what little self-esteem she had left. As the days passed, Amanda found herself drowning in a sea of legal fees and mounting debts. The lavish lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, designer clothes, expensive dinners, regular spa treatments, became a distant memory. She was forced to sell her car, then her jewelry, just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Through it all, she kept expecting Mark to reach out. Despite the harsh words they had exchanged, despite the betrayal that hung between them, a part of her still believed he would come to her rescue. But as weeks turned into months with no word from him, that hope slowly withered and died. One particularly bleak evening, as Amanda sat alone in her increasingly bare apartment, she found herself staring at an old photo of her and Mark. It had been taken on their honeymoon, both of them sun-kissed and laughing on a beach in Bali. They looked so young, so in love, so full of hope for the future. Tears welled up in her eyes as the full weight of what she had lost crashed down on her. Not just her job, not just her social status, but the one person who had always been there for her. The one person she had pushed away in her reckless pursuit of excitement and validation. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and dialed Mark's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His familiar voice, now tinged with an edge of coldness, filled her ear. "You've reached Mark Ramsey. I'm not available right now. Please leave a message." Amanda opened her mouth, 1,000 apologies and pleas for forgiveness on the tip of her tongue. But in the end, all that came out was a choked sob before she hung up. As she curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest, Amanda realized the true cost of her actions. She had gambled everything: her marriage, her career, her reputation, and lost it all. The life she had known was gone, shattered beyond repair by her own selfish choices. Meanwhile, across town, Mark sat in his office, working late as usual. He barely glanced at his phone when it buzzed, the block number a silent reminder of the life he had left behind. Instead, he turned his attention to the woman sitting across from him. Harper Mitchell, a colleague he had known for years but never paid much attention to before, was reviewing some reports with him. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her green eyes sharp and focused as she pointed out some discrepancies in the data. As she spoke, Mark found himself noticing things he had overlooked before. The intelligence behind her eyes, the quiet confidence in her voice, the way her presence seemed to calm the storm of emotions that had been raging inside him for months. "Mark, are you listening?" Harper's voice broke through his thoughts, a hint of amusement in her tone. He blinked, realizing he had been staring. "Sorry, just lost in thought." "You were saying." Harper's smile was understanding, tinged with a warmth that made something stir in Mark's chest. "I was saying that maybe we should call it a night. It's late, and these numbers will still be here in the morning." Mark glanced at his watch, surprised to see it was well past midnight. "You're right. I'm sorry for keeping you so late." "Don't apologize," Harper said, gathering her things. "I'm happy to help. And I know things have been tough for you lately. If you ever need someone to talk to." She let the offer hang in the air, unspoken but clear. Mark felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify. "Thank you, Harper," he said softly. "That means a lot." As they walked out of the office together, Mark felt a glimmer of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't happiness, not quite, but it was close. It was hope. For the first time since that fateful night when his world had come crashing down, Mark allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the pain and betrayal. A future where he wasn't defined by Amanda's actions, but by his own strength and resilience. As he watched Harper drive away, waving goodbye with a warm smile, Mark realized that maybe, just maybe, there was light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. And for the first time in months, he felt ready to move towards it. Mark Ramsey sat in his corner office, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he gazed out at the Seattle skyline. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when his world had imploded. 6 months of anger, pain, a slow-burning desire for retribution. He'd thrown himself into his work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Late nights and weekends at the office had become his new normal. His colleagues whispered about his dedication. His boss praised his results, but few understood the darkness that drove him. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie. Harper Mitchell, his closest confidant these past months, stepped in with a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said, setting the mug on his desk. "You've been staring at that skyline for an hour." Mark managed a small smile. "Thanks, Harper." "Just thinking." She perched on the edge of his desk, concern evident in her green eyes. "About Amanda?" He nodded, not bothering to hide it. Harper was one of the few people who knew the full story of his ex-wife's betrayal. She'd been his rock through the divorce, a steady presence when everything else in his life felt like shifting sand. "I can't let it go," he admitted, voice low. "What she did, it can't just be forgotten." Harper's brow furrowed. "Mark, you've already won." "The divorce settlement. It's not enough," he cut her off, a hard edge to his voice. "She destroyed everything we built. She needs to understand the consequences of her actions." Harper looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Mark's expression stopped her. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Just be careful, okay? Don't let this consume you." Mark nodded, but as Harper left the office, his mind was already churning with plans. He opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he logged into a private messaging forum. Over the past few months, he'd cultivated a network of contacts in various tech companies across Seattle. People who owed him favors, or who simply enjoyed being in the loop on the latest industry gossip. Now it was time to call on those chips. He crafted a carefully worded message, hinting at Amanda's indiscretions without explicitly mentioning her arrest. The implication was clear. Hiring her would be a liability. As he hit send, a small part of him whispered that this was wrong, that he was crossing a line. But the memory of Amanda's cold words in that police station interview room silenced that voice. She had made her choices. Now she would face the consequences. Over the next few weeks, Mark watched from afar as Amanda's attempts to rebuild her life hit wall after wall. Every job application met with polite rejection. Every networking event ended in awkward silences and averted gazes. Her once impeccable reputation, built over years of hard work, crumbled to dust. The whispers followed her everywhere she went. Isn't that the marketing exec who got caught? You know, Mark told himself he felt nothing as he watched her struggle. But late at night, when the office was empty and he was alone with his thoughts, he couldn't quite shake the image of her tear-stained face in that police station. To drown out those moments of doubt, he threw himself even harder into his work. The results were undeniable. His team's productivity soared, landing major contracts that had once seemed out of reach. His boss called him into the office one Friday afternoon, a rare smile on the older man's face. "Mark, I don't know what's got into you these past few months, but whatever it is, keep it up. The board's impressed. There's talk of a VP position opening up soon, and your name's at the top of the list." Mark nodded, accepting the praise with a tight smile. Success tasted sweet, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. That night, as he nursed a scotch in his still sparse apartment, Mark made a decision. It was time to twist the knife one final time. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. The best divorce attorney in Seattle, the one he'd hired to handle his split from Amanda. "Jim, it's Mark Ramsey. I need you to look over something for me. I want to make sure the divorce settlement is airtight. No loopholes, no room for interpretation. I want her left with nothing." As he hung up the phone, Mark felt a cold sense of satisfaction settle over him. Amanda had gambled everything they had built together, thrown it away for fleeting moments of pleasure. Now she would truly understand the cost of her actions. The next morning, as he drove to the office, Mark caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he hardly recognized the man staring back at him. The easy smile and warm eyes that had once characterized his face were gone, replaced by a hard, unforgiving mask. He looked away, pushing down the flicker of unease. This was who he needed to be now. Strong, unyielding. The man Amanda had deemed not good enough was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who would never be betrayed again. Amanda Ramsey stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. This was it, rock bottom. The life she'd known, the success she'd worked so hard for, had crumbled to dust around her. Her hand shook as she unlocked the door, stepping into the apartment that had once been her sanctuary. Now it felt like a tomb, filled with the ghosts of her past mistakes. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing. How had it come to this? 6 months ago, she had it all: a high-powered career, beautiful home, a husband who loved her. Now she was jobless, penniless, and utterly alone. The phone on the coffee table caught her eye. She picked it up, scrolling through her contacts. Names that had once represented friendship, connection, opportunity, now mocked her. Every call for help had gone unanswered, every plea for a second chance met with cold silence. Her finger hovered over Mark's name. She hadn't spoken to him since that day in the police station when the full weight of her betrayal had come crashing down. The memory of his face, twisted with hurt and anger, still haunted her dreams. But she was out of options, out of time. With trembling fingers, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Her heart raced with each unanswered ring. Just as she was about to give up hope, there was a click. "Hello." Mark's voice, once so familiar and comforting, now sounded distant and cold. "Mark," she breathed, relief and fear warring in her chest. It's me. Amanda." There was a long pause. For a moment, Amanda thought he might hang up. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "What do you want, Amanda?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "I need help, Mark. Please. I've lost everything. My job, my apartment. I don't know what to do. I know I have no right to ask, but you're the only person I have left." Another pause, this one stretching so long Amanda feared the call had dropped. When Mark spoke again, his voice was tight with barely contained emotion. "Meet me at the diner on 5th in an hour. Don't be late." The line went dead before Amanda could respond. She stared at the phone, a mixture of hope and dread churning in her stomach. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. A chance. An hour later, Amanda sat in a booth at the back of the diner, nervously shredding a paper napkin. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Mark walk in. The easy warmth she remembered replaced by a cold efficiency. He slid into the booth across from her, his face an unreadable mask. "Thank you for coming," Amanda said softly, fighting the urge to reach for his hand, her breath caught in her throat. He looked different. "Harder somehow. I didn't think you would." Mark's eyes met hers, and she flinched at the coldness she saw there. "Say what you need to say, Amanda. I have a meeting in 30 minutes. She swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in her throat. I made a mistake, Mark. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but I am more sorry than you can imagine." Mark's expression didn't change. "Is that all?" Amanda blinked back tears. "No, I need help. I've been evicted from my apartment. I can't find work anywhere. I'm drowning in legal fees. I don't know what to do." She reached into her purse, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "This is the address of the motel I'm staying at now. It's all I can afford. Please, Mark. I know I don't deserve it, but if you could just help me this one time." Mark took the paper, his eyes scanning the address. For a moment, something like pity flickered across his face. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by that same cold mask. "You're right," he said, his voice low and hard. "You don't deserve my help. You didn't feel sorry when you were destroying our marriage, Amanda. When you were letting strangers touch you. Do you think about the consequences? About the life you were throwing away?" Amanda flinched as if he'd slapped her. "Mark, please," he cut her off, his words sharp as knives. "This is your life now, Amanda. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." He stood up, towering over her. For a moment, Amanda saw a flicker of the man she'd married, kind, compassionate, always ready to help. But then it was gone, replaced by this cold stranger wearing her husband's face. "Goodbye, Amanda," he said, turning to leave. "Don't contact me again." As the diner door swung shut behind him, Amanda buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She'd gambled everything on this meeting, on the hope that some small part of the man she'd loved still existed. Now that hope was gone. She was truly alone. Outside, Mark strode to his car, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He told himself the tightness in his chest was satisfaction, not regret, that the image of Amanda's broken expression didn't bother him. As he slid behind the wheel, his phone buzzed. A text from Harper. How did it go? Mark stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "It's done. She won't bother us again." He started the engine, pushing down the nagging voice in the back of his mind that whispered he'd gone too far. This was justice, he told himself. This was what Amanda deserved. As he pulled away from the curb, Mark didn't look back at the diner. If he had, he might have seen Amanda stumble out onto the sidewalk, lost and alone in a world that no longer had a place for her. But he didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The man who might have felt compassion for his ex-wife's plight was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder. Someone who would never be hurt again. Scene 3. The final twist. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as Mark settled into a seat at the back. He hadn't planned on being here today, but something had drawn him. A need for closure, perhaps. Or maybe just morbid curiosity. Amanda sat at the defendant's table, her once immaculate appearance now a shadow of its former self. Her hair hung limp around her face, her designer clothes replaced by a simple blouse and skirt that had seen better days. She looked small, defeated. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Mark watched as the proceedings unfolded, his face an impassive mask. The charges were read out: repeated solicitation, a violation of her probation from the first arrest. Amanda's lawyer, a public defender who looked barely out of law school, made a half-hearted plea for leniency. But Mark knew it was hopeless. He made sure of that. The judge's voice was stern as he delivered the sentence. "Ms. Ramsey, given your repeated offenses and violation of probation, this court sentences you to 18 months in state prison." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Amanda's shoulders slumped, her head bowing under the weight of the judgment. As the bailiff approached to take her into custody, she looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment, her gaze locked with Mark's. He saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of emotions too complex to name. Hurt, anger, regret, desperation, they all swirled in her eyes, a silent plea that Mark refused to acknowledge. He watched stone-faced as the bailiff handcuffed Amanda, the cold metal clasped around her wrists with a finality that echoed through the room. It was the same way she'd been led away that night months ago when Mark's world had first shattered. As Amanda was led out of the courtroom, she glanced back one last time. Her last glimpse of freedom was Mark, standing impassive and unreadable, watching her with cold detachment. The courtroom doors swung shut behind her with a dull thud. It was over. Mark remained seated as the room emptied around him. He thought watching Amanda face the consequences of her actions would bring him satisfaction, closure. Instead, he felt nothing. A vast, echoing emptiness where his anger had once burned. He stood slowly, straightening his tie. As he walked out of the courthouse, he felt a strange sense of lightness. The weight of betrayal and revenge that had driven him for so long seemed to lift with each step. Outside, the Seattle sky was a brilliant blue, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Mark took a deep breath, feeling as if he was waking from a long, dark dream. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Harper. How did it go? Mark stared at the message for a long moment before replying. It's done. Time to move forward. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, Mark realized something had shifted inside him. The cold, vengeful man who had driven Amanda to ruin was receding, like ice melting in the spring sun. In his place stood someone new. Someone who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. Someone who had found a new purpose, a new direction. He thought of Harper, of the warmth and understanding she'd shown him these past months, of the late-night strategy sessions that had slowly evolved into something more. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in his life for hope again. Mark squared his shoulders and began walking toward his car. Behind him, the courthouse loomed, a monument to the past he was leaving behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. He had regained control of his life. He had faced betrayal and humiliation, but in the end, he had risen stronger than ever. As Amanda began her sentence behind bars, Mark stood tall, ready to embrace whatever came next. The man who had once been defined by his marriage, by Amanda's betrayal, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone victorious. Mark Ramsey had won, in every sense of the word. As he drove away from the courthouse, Mark allowed himself a small smile. The future stretched out before him, bright with promise. He was ready to seize it with both hands.